Arc Worlds Publishing presents Guild of Tokens, Memoria, written by John Auerbach, narrated by Tavia Gilbert. Introduction to Memoria. Memoria begins a year and a half prior to the events of Trainee. Chapter 1. Kate. As much as I like to think it was the opposite, in reality, the quests found me. I was walking one afternoon through Brooklyn Bridge Park with some friends from my hall, when, on a fence post, I noticed this little vial. It looked like a tiny beaker that stood on its end and had a cork stopper in it, sealed with hand-dripped red wax. So I left my friends and walked over, and I could see inside was a tiny paper scroll. It looked like something left by a wood nymph who had escaped from a grim fairy tale. And I remember thinking, maybe I've stumbled on some viral scavenger hunt or a prize, or even a prank. Maybe I'm being filmed for some weird internet TV show. I glanced back at my friends, who were deep in conversation about some profound nonsense our history professor had said during yesterday's lecture, and rather than share this discovery with them, I instead opened the vial and turned it upside down. The scroll fell neatly through the neck of its container, and I unfurled it slowly. Written on the paper was tiny, tiny writing in red ink. It said, "You're here because you know something. You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad." I stared at the scroll. All that build-up for a fucking quote from the Matrix. Sorry, I don't usually curse, but someone clearly had too much time on their hands. At least, that's what I thought at the time. If I had known then what I know now, then maybe I would have rolled the scroll up, stuck it back into that tiny vial, and chucked the thing into the East River. But I didn't. And what a mistake that was. Chapter 2. Kate. The boy next to me was snoring, which was annoying because we were currently sharing the twin bed in his small, even for New York dorm room, leaving me with few options to escape. It's not that I didn't like him. I probably did, although we had only hung out a couple times. But there are some things that I just couldn't tolerate, and this was one of them. I gently lifted Zach's arm up over my waist and slid out of bed, looking back to see him turn his body to face the other way. It was 4 a.m, and the autumn sun wouldn't be up for at least a couple hours. I considered my options. I could quietly get dressed in last night's clothing, slink out of the dorm and take a long subway ride back down to the village and hopefully not get mugged or worse. Or I could quietly get dressed in last night's clothing, slink out of the room, flick through the channels in the lounge at the end of the hallway, and pretend I had been admitted to this stupid, preppy school. The computer monitor on Zach's desk suddenly flickered to life, and a third option presented itself. I wasn't one for prying into other people's electronics, but the window currently open on the screen was like nothing I had ever seen on a modern computer. It was white with black ASCII text, and it reminded me of the rudimentary software my grandpa used to keep track of his crop rotations. As I wiped the sleep from my eyes, for a second I thought it had formed into the shape of a tiny vial. But then I blinked, and instead there was a message. "Welcome back to the quest board, Zach_attack, it said at the top. A list of 10 numbered entries appeared below, and I swear it was like reading a page from one of those fantasy novels that lined the shelves of my older brother's room. Except instead of an imaginary world filled with elves and dwarves, the quests on the screen were asking for things in New York City. Seriously. 1. Feed a leaf of the corpse flower from the botanical gardens to one of the sea lions at the Bronx Zoo. Reward 17 iron. 2. A cup of dirt from Corlear's Hook Park. Put it in the mailbox on the corner of Madison and Governor, and I'll take it from there. Reward 3 iron. 3. Hiya, could you help me out by fetching me a handful of blueberries, a tillandsia, an orange popsicle, and 3 pounds of 80/20 ground beef from Chelsea Market? Leave in the windowsill of 194 West 9th Street. Thanks. Reward 1 wood. My eyes scanned the rest of the entries until I reached the bottom of the screen where further instructions awaited. Select your quest or press A for the next page, B to submit your own, C for Q-mail, D for quester profile, or escape to quit. My mind was racing, and all thoughts of fleeing evaporated as I clicked through page after page of these so-called quests. I was about to open Q-mail, whatever that was, when I heard rustling in the bed behind me.
"Kate?"
mumbled Zach, half asleep.
"Is that you?"
Yeah, babe, it's me, I said, quickly turning off the monitor. Just had to pee. I retook my little spoon position in bed, Zach's arm soon returning to my thigh, and tried to forget everything from the past 10 minutes. It didn't work. So I did something rash, something bold, something the 18-year-old girl who left Lincoln, Nebraska a few weeks ago would have never done. I went to the computer, turned the monitor back on, and selected the first quest. We held hands all the way from the Metro North station. It was awkward because, well, holding hands was something couples did, and I didn't know what we were, really. I had told Zach the next morning that I had accepted the corpse flower quest. He had stared at me blankly for about 3 minutes before silently exiting the room. When he hadn't come back after an hour, I had shrugged my shoulders and went back on the quest board to explore until he returned from his 11 a.m. class. I had bombarded him with as many questions about the quests as I could come up with, but he had deftly deflected and demurred them all. Finally, after a different type of convincing, Zach agreed to let me complete the quest with him. A trial run, as he called it. So that was how we found ourselves at the New York Botanical Gardens the following Saturday, pretending to be tourists from Sweden. It would let us linger by the corpse flower a little longer, I had postulated, but Zach was skeptical. "Are you ready?" I asked, after we handed our tickets to the stern-looking man at the entrance to the atrium.
"I guess, yeah."
"You don't sound so sure." He grew visibly irritated and would have let go of my hand had I not squeezed it.
"Of course I'm not convinced," he whispered. "This quest is way out of my comfort zone. I usually stick to the easy stuff, like buying random shit at a flea market."
"Where's the fun in that?" I said with a smile. "And besides, you're never going to level up with that strategy. You've been stuck on level 2 for 2 months? He jerked my arm suddenly, and I nearly fell into him.
"Look, I already told you the other day that you shouldn't have been snooping around on my computer, let alone looking through the quest board. You're not supposed to... It says I'm supposed to quest alone. I could get suspended by the council if they find out."
"But they're not going to find out," I said. "I'm not going to tell them. Are you?"
"Well, no."
"Good. And after this is over, I'll just get my own account, and then it won't even be an issue." I let go of him and ran ahead to the enormous line of people waiting to get into the main section of the atrium. When he finally caught up to me, I put my finger to my lips, and he nodded reluctantly. It was showtime. We had practiced our fake accents the night before, and I had decided that the best course of action was to say as little as possible. Which, given the hundreds of people who had showed up to see a smelly flower, would probably be an easy thing to do.
"Right this way! Right this way!" shouted a docent over the crowd. "Tickets 251 to 325, up here with me. The rest, hang back."
"That's us," I whispered, and we quickly joined the assembled crowd.
"The Titan Arum," the docent said, "otherwise known as the corpse flower, has a curious life cycle. Once every 4 to 5 years, it produces a flower that blooms only for a single day, before withering and dying. And in that one day, the flower produces a rather pungent smell, which, oddly enough, attracts pollinators. We've had several Titanarums here at the Botan over the years, and we're fortunate to have one in bloom again."
I felt the press of the crowd against me, and I stuck my elbows out to push them back as the docent gave us the final instructions.
In a minute, you'll get to approach the flower in groups of 5. Each group will have 2 minutes, and then you'll need to move on to the rest of the atrium."
"Hold back," I whispered to Zach, "and then you'll distract the docent when your group comes up." He nodded and stepped back while I slowly approached my quarry. The docent stood guard in front of a roped-off section of the garden, with the flower towering behind him. Its odor already threatened to overwhelm my nose, which, after spending every summer on my grandpa's farm, took a lot. But I needed to get closer. I now appreciated the irony of the docent's comment about the flower attracting pollinators despite its horrid smell. Were all of us here not also pollinators, but in a different way? We would leave the atrium and tell our friends that we had seen the magnificent corpse flower, and then they too would try to visit, and then tell their friends, and so on, and the flower's legend would continue to grow. I tucked that philosophical quandary into the back of my mind, as my time with the flower was almost at its end. The edge of the flower's enormous petal was a few feet beyond the rope, and I hoped that my nails were sharp enough to break off a piece without too much struggle. The docent raised his hand to urge us onward, and that's when I heard a familiar cry from behind. "I think someone's fainted," I said to the docent, who didn't know if he should abandon his post guarding the flower or go help the person in need, before finally relenting and scurrying away. I watched the crowd part to let him through to Zach before quickly ducking under the rope to break off a section of the petal. Except when I arrived at the corpse flower, the chunk of the petal I was going to grab was already gone. I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my shin and a whoosh of air hit my face, and the next thing I knew, I was lying face down at the base of the plant. The smell was overpowering at this close distance, and I struggled to push myself up. But when I finally did get back to my feet, all hope of a quick escape went out the window, as I saw 3 guards converge on me, while Zach faded silently in the crowd and walked away. Chapter 3. Cora. The woman with blonde hair observed the scene from afar and frowned. It should have been an easy mission, but her soon-to-be erstwhile boyfriend couldn't keep his pants on long enough between her visits, and so he had snared himself a freshman from downtown. That in and of itself wasn't a big deal. He was a 21-year-old college kid, after all, and she could only gain control of her host body once every 3 weeks during a good month. The complicating factor was that this new girl had not only taken Zach to bed, but had stumbled onto his computer in the middle of the night and taken the very quest that Zach needed to complete. Cora had resisted her host's urge to reassert control for one more day, and this had allowed her to follow the couple up to the botanical gardens. After some more observation, she had concluded that it might not have been such a bad idea to have Kate intercede in the quest, as the farm girl had proven herself more competent in subterfuge than her beau. The folly of inheritance she had now come to realize. But what Zach had lacked in intelligence he had made up for in alchemic wealth, even if he was the third son of a third son. It was the angle she had to play in her current state, unfortunately, and she didn't know whether this extra exertion would be worth the potential price of sitting unused in a drawer for another decade. She watched the couple enter the atrium, and Kate whisper something to Zach, who nodded and halted his progression, while the redhead advanced toward the flower. The girl had moxie, it seemed. It was short-lived, however, because just as she made her move, an opposing force revealed itself, just in time to steal the prize. This was what Cora had expected, and it was still gratifying, after all these years, to know that her intellect and instincts were still above and beyond most other living humans. But just as quickly as her true target had appeared, did she vanish, aided no doubt by one of her so-called speed buffs. This too she had predicted, and it was currently one puzzle that she hadn't yet managed to crack. That was until she witnessed the security detail descend on poor Kate and haul her down to the atrium basement. An unexpected gift that would allow her to plant the seed earlier than she had hoped. For in this girl, she sensed drive and determination. It was just a matter of directing those energies toward their common enemy.
Cora watched the security detail depart for the main office, and she quickly descended into the basement. The hallway that greeted her ran the length of the atrium, and she hoped that Kate heard her echoing footsteps as she approached. Surprisingly, there was a makeshift cell at the end, in which the poor girl was sitting on the floor, clutching her ankle. "Hello," said Cora. Kate looked up at her with a confused expression. "Hi," she replied. "You're a bit young to be the head of the Thane Center." "I'm sorry?" "The person in charge of the exhibit, and who also maintains the forest at the center of the gardens. The security guards said that they were going to get her." Cora crouched down so she was eye level with Kate, which, in the heels she was wearing, would have made a normal woman's feet go numb. But she was not exactly a normal woman. "It's a nice forest. From what I remember, I used to walk it frequently in my younger days. Maybe if they let you out of here soon, you can go see it." "I'm confused," said Kate, who winced as she suddenly stood up. "If you're not with the gardens, then why are you here?" Cora grasped the bars of the cell door and pulled herself back to her feet. She had a good 6 inches on the girl in her heels. Not that she needed the height advantage at the moment. "I'm here because I need your help. I want you to help me find the woman who put you in this cell." Kate's confusion grew as she considered Cora's words, and she took a few steps backward into the cell. What are you talking about? The security guards put me in here." "They did, but that's not why you're here. You're here because you unknowingly got in Trinity's way." I don't know who that is, or how I could have— "Let me just cut to the chase," said Cora. "You were here on a quest with Zack to take a piece of the corpse flower. So was Trinity. Unfortunately for you, you do not have alchemy-enhanced speed, so when you tried to grab the petal, she had already beat you to it. And kicked your shin for good measure. And now she's gone, and you're stuck holding the empty bag, as it were." "You know about the quests? Do they have something to do with that vial?" "I know a lot about a lot of things, some of which I will tell you about in time." Cora felt a slight pull against her neck, and instinctively grasped the green stone on the chain with her right hand, while her left hand fished the Letherium tablet out of her jacket pocket. "Here," said Cora, extending her hand past the bars. "What is that, a mint?" asked Kate, who took the golden square without question. "I thought you could use one. You'll be down here for a while." Kate nodded and popped the tablet into her mouth, which made Cora's lips curl up slightly. "It tastes like emptiness, which is what is filling your head right now. But I want you to hold on to a singular thought for me while I take the rest. Can you do that for me? Until we meet again?" Kate's eyes widened as the Letherium took effect. "Find her." Chapter 4. Kate. Who even knew the Botan had a jail? I mean, it seemed like the kind of place where the most extreme thing they could muster up was a stern talking to by a woman with graying hair holding a watering can. And yet I spent what felt like 12 hours in a holding cell somewhere in the bowels of the Arboretum, probably directly below the stinking flower for an added dash of irony. When the door to the cell finally creaked open, it was nearly midnight, and by the time I reached the entrance to Zack's dorm, it was almost 2, and he was arm in arm with some girl with blonde hair who might actually have been from Sweden. I wanted to run up and punch him in the back of the head, but I was exhausted, and my shin still ached from whatever had hit me in front of the flower. So I did what every normal girl from Lincoln does when she finds out their sort of boyfriend is two-timing them. I showed up at his doorstep the next morning, bright and early, with a heaping pile of freshly made pancakes and a bottle of maple syrup. Needless to say, the not actually Swedish girl who answered was nonplussed at the whole situation, and slammed the door in my face. And so ended the first chapter of my questing career. Without access to Zack's questing account, I had no way to access the quest board, no way to earn tokens, no way to find out what the hell this whole thing was in the first place. It wasn't like I could just Google weird internet quests and find my way back. Believe me, I tried.
As much as I wanted to believe the whole thing was some psych grad student's idea of a practical joke, there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that just wouldn't go away. That and the way the corpse flower petal had just vanished right before my eyes. So I pressed on, searching for a hint or a whiff of something. Anything. But as the weeks turned into months, I found myself ready to give up and pretend I had imagined the whole thing. Then one day, when I was walking through Chelsea Market to pick up some tacos I had heard about from a girl on my haul, a flash of inspiration hit me. There had been a quest that first night in Zach's room that was asking for a bunch of random crap from the market. A mixture of beef, a fistful of blueberries, a fruit-flavored popsicle, and some sort of flour? The details were hazy, but I forced myself to remember. 5 minutes before closing, I left with a tote bag full of what I hoped were the right items and headed for an address I hoped was the one referenced in the quest. The place looked boarded up when I arrived, but I left the bag in the windowsill just the same. I returned the next day and the bag was still there and full, except for the popsicle that had melted into a pile of mush. When I went back the day after and the day after that, it was more of the same. That Saturday, I resolved to spend the entire day on the bench across the street, in the hopes that whoever had posted that original quest was still out there, waiting for someone to complete it. It being January and snowing, it was not the most pleasant way to pass the time. But I had no other choice left, really, save for breaking into Zach's room and demanding he invite me back to the board. And with how my pancake delivery had been received, I didn't think that had a high chance of success. I must have passed out at some point, either from the cold or the boredom, but when I checked the windowsill at 9 o'clock that night, the items were gone, and in their place was a note. Impressive. You even got the beef blend right. Text me your address and you'll get the red pill soon enough. The proverbial red pill arrived 3 days later in the form of a USB thumb drive in my dorm mailbox. I ran upstairs and inserted it into my laptop, only to find that the only thing on there was a text file with a single sentence that said, "Follow the white rabbit," followed by an ASCII picture of said white rabbit. I rolled my eyes at yet another Matrix reference and was about to toss the drive in my garbage when I looked at the rabbit again. Its head was pointing down. So, on a lark, I highlighted the rest of the document with my cursor to reveal what was quite possibly the longest website address I had ever seen, hiding as white text. I pasted the URL into my browser, backed up the contents of my laptop, and then tabbed back over and hit enter. Nothing happened. I hit enter again, and still the page remained blank. Frustrated, I went down the hall to fill up my thermos at the water fountain, and came back to my room to find nothing had changed. I refreshed yet again, and that's when something finally happened. The string of white Christmas lights that hung on the ceiling above my bed went out. Then each of my 3 lamps did the same, along with my closet light. And then, finally, the dingy light fixture that was left over from when the dorm was first built. The only thing left alight in my room was my laptop screen, which now sported a white window with black ASCII text splashed across that read, "Welcome to the quest board." I smiled. Getting access to the quest board was only the beginning. I spent the first few days on a bender, doing quest after quest after quest. It was like a new designer drug that only I knew about. Not that I really knew about drugs. I was pretty straight-laced as they came back home, and the only thing that I did that was against the rules growing up was sneaking out once to watch a midnight showing of The Princess Bride at the local drive-in theater. By the end of that first week, I had to take a break to protect my sanity and also my grades, as spring finals week had arrived. I tried to throw myself into my studies with the same rigor I had applied to the quests, but the thought of reading one more analysis of Freud's essay on the uncanny paled in comparison to the actual uncanny quests that were waiting just a keystroke away. In the end, though, I kept my head down until the last essays were turned in, and then immediately ran to the nearest coffee shop to log back onto the quest board. With classes done and a mind-numbing but thankfully predictable summer job at one of the college's vast number of administrative offices freeing up my off hours, my initial pile of 7 wooden tokens soon swelled. Earning them had taken me across the city a dozen times over, out of my Greenwich Village bubble. Their craftsmanship was quite stunning, and I posited that they each must have taken several hours to carve. As my loot grew and the summer waned, a nagging thought kept tugging at me from the back of my mind. Who was this mystery benefactor, and what did they want? Why had they sent me the quest board invite, only to recede back into the shadows? Finally, at the beginning of August, a sliver of an answer arrived. I was in the middle of yet another week sorting old faculty files when a yellowed piece of folded and taped paper fell free and lazily drifted to the floor. Before I could absent-mindedly stick it back inside the folder, the front of the paper caught my eye. "Kate," it said in neat block letters. Probably a coincidence, I thought. Maybe this professor's name was Kate. Except the file belonged to one Glenn Marl. Fine. Maybe it was a note that Professor Marl meant to send to a colleague. Except I now knew the list of business school faculty from the past 30 years, and there was no Professor Kate or Katie or Catherine or even Kitty. "Oops," I said, as my fingers tore open the tape and unfurled the note. "Star City Cutie 42, it said at the top. What the hell? How do they know my quest board handle? "First, get a better handle," the note continued. "You're not in middle school anymore." Hey, I liked my handle, even if it was from my old Tumblr site. "Second, you're overdoing it. Slow down." A fair point. I had recently pulled an all-nighter, collecting refuse from behind restaurants in all 5 boroughs in the pouring rain, and was rewarded for my troubles with 1 whole bronze token, even though I was promised 10. Third, for fuck's sake, get a Q-mail account. Who knows if you're ever going to find this letter? I remembered seeing Zach's Q-mail account that first night, but I'd never figured out how to create my own. Noted. Fourth, if you really want to know the truth about everything, then be at Belvedere Castle on August 14th at 10:45. Cheers, Trinity. Who was Trinity to talk about handles when she, assuming she even was a woman, was just borrowing her entire persona from the Matrix? But if Trinity wanted me to slow down, giving me yet another quest to complete hardly seemed like the way to do that. Luckily, August 14th was only a week away. Maybe then I would finally get some answers. Chapter 5. Cora. Summer in New York City was hit or miss. Fortunately for Cora, she had missed most of it. After seeing Kate show up at Zach's doorstep the night after their meeting in the basement, her host had re-exerted control that lasted well through the spring semester. And so Cora was forced into a role she had played frequently over the years, that of the compulsory bystander. Unlike in decades past, when some of her hosts had been right in the thick of alchemy circles, this one left much to be desired. Instead of using the gift of the glamour for something interesting or intriguing, this host had been using it to fornicate. It made Cora want to roll her eyes if she still had them. Finally, by mid-July, the host had overindulged to such an extent on a trip to the south of France that Cora was ready to reassert herself when the time was right. The plane landed at 7 a.m., and when the striking blonde in 2A who had flirted a bit too much with the flight attendant named Francois awoke from her mid-afternoon nap, she found herself back in the pit of her own mind. Cora wasted no time in utilizing her reacquired body and had marched down to Kate's dorm room and rapped on the door around 9 p.m. The girl opened the door with trepidation, no doubt alarmed at the visage of Cora in her peephole. "Look, I didn't know he was your boyfriend, but we haven't seen each other since that night and don't care, not why I'm here. Can I come in?" Kate was visibly shaking and her eyes were bloodshot, despite the early evening hour. But she acquiesced to Cora's request and stepped aside to let her pass. The dorm room was covered with papers and books, which was odd.
Because it was the summer, and Cora knew that summer was not normally a time that college students focused on such academic matters. She made herself comfortable on Kate's unmade bed and surveyed the room. A picture of a castle taped to the wall above Kate's computer drew Cora's eye, and she smiled. Her words were doing their job wonderfully, but she needed to know how far the girl had come in these long months. Had she already found Trinity? Or was she still in the middle of the woman's arduous training program? "You've been busy. That's heartening to see." Kate stood just at the edge of the room, not knowing what to make of her, not knowing what to say. "I need a mint." "Yes, where are my manners? Here you go." Cora withdrew a thin circular mint from her pocket. It had a silver sheen and tasted terrible from what she remembered of the others. The girl took the mint with trepidation, unlike last time, but ate it quickly just the same. "It tastes like the truth." Kate's eyes rolled into the back of her head as the morarium tablet removed the effect of the previous mint, and when she finally regained what had been hidden from her, she clasped her hand over her mouth in shock. You! You were there in the basement at the Botan. But I didn't realize it. When I saw you in Zach's room, I thought you were just his girlfriend. But how fortunate for me that you fell into his bed. I told you I didn't know, or else I never would have. Relaxed, Kate. Do you think this is all about some stupid boy? No. There are more important things we need to discuss, such as your search for Trinity. That last part got the girl completely flustered, and her knees nearly buckled, so Cora directed her over to the desk chair and then retook her spot on the bed. How do you know about that? Do you remember what I told you that night? No, said Kate. Wait, I remember it now. You found me in the basement, told me about Trinity and alchemy and the quests, and then you gave me a mint. But after that... Cora watched as Kate tried to piece everything together, and she didn't envy what she was going through. Having remembered one version of the truth for so long, only for the real truth to spring forth from inside her mind, like Athena emerging from Zeus's skull, well, she had to imagine it was giving the girl quite a headache. Even though everything has come back to me, it's like whatever you told me at the end is just out of reach in my mind. And that's what scares me the most. The only thing that seems to be missing is the end of our conversation, in which I told you not to worry and that we would meet again. This was a bold-faced lie. The reason that Kate had so much trouble remembering those two little words was not because of anything wrong with the morarium tablet. No, it was because Cora had spoken those words directly into Kate's subconscious. It was a powerful piece of alchemy, and one Cora reserved for situations such as this. What good was a mind-wiped supplicant if they couldn't remember what the hell they were supposed to be doing for her? Oh, okay. But how do you know about Trinity, then? I've been hearing whispers about her for some time, but it's been difficult for me in my present circumstances to track her down, much like her namesake in that movie. I don't care for the handle. I mean, can't she come up with something more original? Kate's features finally relaxed, and her mouth curled into a soft smile. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's not like The Matrix came out yesterday. And I didn't even tell you about the vial I found with a Matrix quote in it. Oh! The girl paused for a moment, and Cora let her sift through the newly resurfaced memories. Actually, you did. But it's okay. Your mind will eventually get used to this process. What do you mean? I want you to keep looking for her. But she can't know that your search for her is anything other than your inner drive to discover the truth about magic. Magic? Cora sat the girl down and explained more about alchemy than she would likely learn in her first 6 years of questing. But she felt she owed Kate something for what she had done, and would continue to do for her. And the girl's mind was like a sponge, soaking up every bit of knowledge and even surprising Cora with some of the connections between the disparate disciplines. Unfortunately, it would do her no good in the weeks ahead. As the clock struck midnight, and their time together had come to an end, Cora placed a golden square on Kate's desk "When will I see you again?" asked the girl, who took the mint willingly and began to chew it slowly. "Not for a while. It will take you some time to work yourself into Trinity's good graces." "Okay. I guess I'll see you when I see you then? Thank you for telling me the truth." Kate's eyes widened, just the same as the first time, and Cora considered what command to implant this time. Don't give up. Chapter 6. Kate. There was a castle in Central Park. This was news to me, and not just one of those pretend castles on a playground covered in kid snot and who knows what else. A real, honest-to-goodness castle, with ramparts and a tower and everything. It reminded me of the castle at Renaissance Fairground in Antelope Park, except that it wasn't made of rubber and filled with air. I studied Belvedere Castle from afar, as it would be uncouth to perform a scouting quest, especially when I suspected this was yet another tryout from my mysterious benefactor. But I learned enough about its layout that I was certain I could escape in any number of ways if need be, save for jumping out of the top tower into Turtle Pond below, and even that seemed like a 50-50 proposition. Finally, August 14th arrived. I spent the morning aimlessly scrolling through pages of quests while flicking a wooden token into the air over and over again, and then I spent the afternoon going backward through the quests until I arrived at the first page again. In between, I scarfed down a pint of Goodrich peanut butter fudge ice cream that my mom had sent me last week. By 6 p.m., my nerves were already shot, so I collected my token stash, deposited it into the secret pocket I had sewn at the bottom of my pink knapsack, and departed for the upper hinterlands of the island, armed with a small can of mace and my wits. I thought about bringing my pocket knife, or maybe a regular knife, or even some sort of sword. I was going to a castle, after all, but had decided against it. The journey was nevertheless fraught with peril. First, I battled against the raging humidity that had descended over Manhattan, only to finally prevail when the heavens opened up, and I found myself soaked from head and backpack to toe. My purple NYU t-shirt clung to my body like an oil slick on a lake, and eventually I discarded it in a hopefully empty alleyway, donning an I Heart New York tank top I had purchased just north of Times Square from a leering street vendor. Then I tussled with the security guard at the Met, who wanded me more times than I wanted to count in search of my token cash and mace secreted out of sight. I spent the remaining hours until closing time, wandering the museum's seemingly endless hallways of awesome artifacts, trying to psych myself up for the task ahead. My last opponent of the evening was darkness itself. Even in the city that never sleeps, with its endless lights, there are still pockets of emptiness. And Central Park at dusk seemed to be the nexus. I traversed the tree-lined path away from the museum, past the statue of a king, until finally the tower of Belvedere Castle crested into view. I circled around to the courtyard on the opposite side and waited for the appointed hour. My phone buzzed. It was time. I brought up the quest board and found an unsigned message waiting in my newly acquired Q-mail inbox. Collect moss from the castle. Well, that was pretty anticlimactic. I was expecting something a bit more challenging, like fighting the undead guardian of the keep, or standing on one foot at the top of the tower for the entire night. But there was moss growing on the plaque on the base of the castle wall, and so with my dorm room key, I scraped off as much as I could and responded to the message. Done. Several minutes passed before the reply materialized. Leave the moss behind the witch. What? Thankfully, the magic of the internet provided a quick answer to the riddle. There was a carving of a witch near Bethesda Fountain, which was conveniently located on the other side of something called the Ramble and across a body of water called the Lake. I set off immediately, hoping that the mace would be enough to defend myself from anything lurking in the night. But the trek southward was uneventful, and as I crossed a stone bridge and the fountain came into view, I breathed a sigh of relief.
I stuck the handful of moss into the crevice behind the witch and reported back that the second task was done. This time, the response was almost instantaneous. Collect your token at the New York Public Library. You've got to be kidding me. The note had promised the truth, whatever that was, not another worthless coin. But after getting this far, I had to find out what all my effort had earned me, and so I quickly exited the park and hailed a taxi on Fifth Avenue. It was nearly midnight by the time I passed between the lions guarding the library, and it being midnight and everything, the library was obviously closed, but I strode up to the giant front door, like Dorothy approaching the gates of Oz, and knocked, not knowing what else to do. To my complete shock, out of the metal mail slot fell a little brown satchel. I furiously undid the satchel's strings and pulled out one shiny, and more importantly, silver token. "Hi," said an accented voice behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my still-soaked tank top. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the sight of a girl with dark black hair dressed in a black sweater, a black skirt, and knee-high black boots, holding a flannel tote bag around her shoulder. She couldn't have been more than 16. "Nice outfit," said the girl with a smirk and a decidedly British accent. "Thanks," I replied, my voice nearly cracking. "It's new. As are you, it would seem," she said. "What do you mean?" "Don't know anyone else stupid enough to show up here alone, but it is what it is." "I'm sorry?" "You will be if you don't hand it over." My pulse began to quicken. Was I being mugged? "Hand what over? My wallet? My phone? You can— No, neither. It's your tokens I'm after." I froze. "I don't know what you're talking about. Look, I don't want any trouble. I don't have too much on me, but—" "Fine, we'll do it the other way, I suppose." The girl dropped the tote bag to the ground, and it landed with a clang for some reason. I quietly began fumbling with my backpack zipper in an attempt to retrieve the mace, when the girl reached her arm deep into the bag and pulled out an impossibly long and very real metal sword. She held it aloft, and the blade seemed to repel the darkness, an otherworldly glow beating back the night and the remains of my courage. Then she brought it down in one smooth arc until the point of the weapon was aimed directly at the heart on my tank top. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm Emma Patel, head of the Black Vultures. A pleasure to meet you. Now, which arm should I lop off first?" I threw up. It wasn't the proudest moment of my life, but fortunately it took the girl named Emma completely off guard, and she lowered the sword ever so slightly as the vomit slowly made its way to a drainage grate next to one of the library lions. "I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding," I said, wiping the remainder from my mouth. "I'm just here to collect the token I earned for completing the quest up at the castle." "Right," said Emma, "and I'm here to rob you. It was my quest, and that's my silver token." "What?" I asked, taken aback. "A robbery, a hold-up, a filching, what else do you Yanks call it? Or maybe con job is more accurate. I list an easy quest with a way too big reward and relieve whoever shows up of their valuables. It's pretty straightforward. If the mark refuses, Soleil here usually gets us to a satisfying conclusion." Emma stuck the point of her sword into the ground and leaned on it like it was a cane, and I noticed the panoply of rings on almost all of her fingers. Her face wore a smirking teenage grin, and if I wasn't so overly outmatched, I would take a run at her, even if she did have 10 pounds on me. "I don't understand. I thought this was supposed to be a test. I was going to—" "Don't know nothing about a test," said Emma, "but whoever put you up to it does not have your best interest at heart, I'm afraid." I looked down at the silver token nestled in my palm. It gleamed in the moonlight, the etched number 1 in the middle looking particularly regal compared to the other tokens in my bag. What it was really worth, I had no idea, but I knew someone who did. "Okay," I said, holding the token out in front of me and walking slowly in a semicircle toward the nearest lion. The girl and her sword still cut off any hope of escape, which was exactly what I was hoping for, as I reached the statue without incident. "I have a question, though," I said, my foot gently tapping against the grate as I slowly extended my token-holding arm out over it. "What?" said Emma. "What happens if I drop this token down the drain?" Emma's eyes widened, and she quickly raised her sword back up. "You wouldn't dare, you stupid little git! I swear, if you do, I'll—" Hey, I said, trying to maintain my composure while my insides turned themselves into peach jelly. "I'm just talking hypotheticals, and I think I know part of the answer. You really want to slice my arm off with that giant sword of yours, it seems, but that won't get your token back, and probably bring a whole lot of attention down on you. Am I right?" The girl considered the question, her sword still aloft. I should have been more afraid, but it was like I had stumbled onto a movie set, and my subconscious didn't want to believe anything I had just seen. "Okay," said Emma. "Okay, what?" "I'll treat with you. What do you want?" I almost blurted out that I just wanted to get out of here alive, but now that I had some sort of leverage, I decided to get some answers. I was promised something by the person who told me to complete this quest, and seeing as how that turned out, I doubt they are going to fulfill their end of the bargain, so I may as well get it from you. "And what's that?" "The truth," I said. "The truth about all this. The quests, the tokens, the whole thing. I mean, I've seen some interesting things since I started, but pulling an enormous sword out of a tote bag, that's something that just shouldn't be possible." "You're right," said Emma with a smirk. "It isn't possible. And I bet it's making your little head hurt just thinking about it." "Maybe," I said, and oddly enough, a dull pain in the back of my head had suddenly materialized. "So is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she said. "Now, if you'll just gently place the token on the ground, I'll put away my sword and we can get down to business." "I don't think so," I said. "There's nothing stopping you from telling me what I want to know, and then committing your unspeakable act of violence anyway. No, we'll reconvene at a more appropriate hour. No weapons, no magic tote bags, no funny business." "Fine," said Emma. "Where did you have in mind?" Chapter 7. Kate. "Why, of all places, did you want to meet here?" said Emma the next morning. It was Saturday, and the adrenaline from the previous night's events had almost worn off to the point where I could start imbibing food again. "Because it is known that the Central Park Children's Zoo has a strict no-murder policy," I replied with a smile, and Emma rolled her eyes. She was dressed in a similar ensemble as the night before, except now her fingers featured an additional half-dozen rings. What with the children and the delightful farm animals, it reminds me a bit of home. I scattered a handful of animal feed over the fence, and several eager goats scampered over to eat it, while Emma scowled. "Will you cut that out? You're acting like if we met at the seals over at the regular zoo, I'd already have cut your foot off or something." "Well, you did threaten to lop off my arm, did you not?" I replied. "Fair point. But sometimes it's fun to get a reaction when I take out Soleil. It's much more impressive looking than the white-hilled." "Do I want to know what that is?" In my mind, I pictured a much longer and sharper sword, obviously with a white hilt. No, you do not. Anyway, can we get down to it? I really need my silver token back." I reached into the inner recesses of my bag to retrieve the token, only to come up empty. Panic began to set in, as I could have sworn I had stowed it in the zippered side pocket, but the only thing in there was a tube of lipstick and some breath mints. Not wanting to admit I didn't have the goods, I quickly ad-libbed again. "I don't have the token with me," I said, hoping to buy myself a few seconds. "What? Why am I here, then? I could have been sleeping, or I could have just been coming home after not sleeping. I thought we had a deal." "We do have a deal. The token for the truth. But I don't have any assurances from you that once I give you the token, that you'll hold up your end of the bargain. So what we are going to do is—" Emma's right arm was suddenly around my shoulder, and she let out a playful laugh, as if we were old friends recounting last night's adventures in the village. Except then her black-painted fingernails began to dig into my skin through my t-shirt, and I suppressed a yelp of pain by biting my tongue. "We may be in a children's zoo, and I may have left my weapons at home, but I still have ways to hurt you. Now cut the shit and give me back my token, or you'll be lucky if the only thing bruised by the evening is your shoulder." She withdrew her arm quickly, and before I could even breathe a sigh of relief, the rings on her fingers started to buzz as they brushed against the back of my head. "What was that?" I asked, and Emma slowly took 2 steps away from me and looked at the stones in her rings, which had changed to a brilliant shade of turquoise. "That," said Emma, whose whole demeanor had changed on a dime, "is the signal to me to get the hell out of here. Keep the token, it's yours. Consider it both a gift for outwitting me and a payment." "A payment for what? I don't understand." "A payment so that if you ever see me again, you will quickly turn and walk the other way." Emma strode off toward the pig pen, and I wanted to run after to ask what the heck was going on. But then I thought about the one sword I had already seen, and the other that was somehow even worse, and decided to stay put, feeding the animals. The silver token gleamed in the mid-morning light as I sat at the table outside the coffee shop. There was nothing unusual about this particular caffeine dispensary, other than that it served a delicious almond milk cold brew drink with honey that I hadn't come across at any other non-chain establishment in the city. Oh, and this was the meeting spot where Trinity was finally going to reveal herself, or himself. I had sent Trinity a Q-mail note after getting home from the zoo yesterday morning, informing her that I had retrieved the silver token per her instructions, and leaving out the harrowing ordeal I had faced. By noon, I had a response back. "Meet at Bleecker Street grounds tomorrow at 10 a.m. Sit at the table to the left of the door. I'll be wearing sunglasses and a white hat." I had arrived 20 minutes early and spent each of those minutes scanning the sidewalk for anyone wearing the designated outfit. By 10:15, I was beginning to worry that Trinity wasn't showing up, and by 10:45, I was ready to call it and go pick an easy quest to kill the rest of the day. But then a black Suburban pulled up in front of the shop, and the door slowly opened to reveal a woman with large black sunglasses and a large white sun hat holding a braided leather bag. As she stepped down onto the street, I couldn't help but notice that she was severely pregnant, and for whatever reason, instead of the flowing summer dresses I had seen other pregnant Manhattanites sporting, she had decided to wear a tight black lycra tank top, which was straining to stay in one piece as she slowly walked past the front gate and sat down at the empty chair across from me. "Hello, Kate," said the woman, sweat dripping down the sides of her neck. She withdrew a small cloth from inside that fancy designer bag and patted her brow and her neck clean. Somehow it was still impeccably dry when she stowed it away. "Trinity?" I asked. How do you know my name?" "I know a lot about you," she said. "I know why you're here, what you've been doing, why you hardly sleep, why night after night you sit at your computer. You're looking for something. An answer to a question. It drives you." "Can I just stop you for a second?" I interjected. "Is this all necessary? I mean, I found the vial with the Morpheus quote, which was a bit weird, but fine. Then I track you down, and now there's a Trinity. And just now you lifted your entire speech from the movie. So can I ask you a question? Is this all some ridiculous casting call, or is there something more going on here? Do you even want this token? Because I've seen some things, and I just want the truth." "The truth is complicated," Trinity said. "Too much of it will break your head. Not enough of it, and you'll find yourself 7 years into the quests with only a pile of worthless tokens to show for it. That silver one included. In the middle, there is what you currently need. But time is short, so for now I'll give you my name, a job, and a task, and hopefully you'll find some truth through your own efforts." "Oh, okay." "My name," she said, "is Beatrice Taylor." I felt something push against my leg under the table. "Your job," she continued, "is to sell every last dose of knockoff Adderall in that duffel. And your task," she concluded, withdrawing a folded piece of paper from her bag, "is to find this." I gingerly took the piece of paper, unfurled it, and was greeted by a string of numbers encased in brackets. 949.278, I read. "What does it mean?" "That," said the woman now named Beatrice, "is for you to figure out. Suffice it to say, it's something I've been searching for a long time, and given my current state, I'm not sure I'll be able to find it anytime soon." Beatrice rubbed the top of her belly slowly, before withdrawing a little vial from inside her bag. She unscrewed the top and took a small sip of the contents, which made her head twitch uncontrollably for a few seconds. "What was that?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Something I probably shouldn't be drinking, but it keeps me going. Anyway, hopefully by the next time we meet, I'll be back to my college weight, and you'll finally be ready to help me." She slowly pushed herself up from the table before I could offer her my arm and walked out of the cafe, where another imposing black SUV was now waiting. I left the duffel bag under the table and trotted after her. "That's it?" I asked. "A few sentences of nonsense and a menial job? Do you know what I went through to get that token?" "Are you a doctor?" she answered. "No," I said. "I'm about to be a sophomore, so good, then we're on the same page. So let me get to the hospital now, please, as my water just broke and I don't feel like explaining myself to you while an 8-pound human pushes his way out of my body. Take care." Chapter 8. Cora. Cora awoke in an unfamiliar bed, next to an unfamiliar man, and an unfamiliar woman. In the dim light of the room, she could see that all three of them were in various states of undress, most of all herself, who only had on the glamour at the moment. Such debauchery was unbecoming, and this episode had pushed her to the conclusion that her host had become unsuitable. Unfortunately, due to the long list of items on her plate and her limited time in which to complete them, she had not made any progress toward finding a new one. The woman at the edge of the bed began to stir, and a thought percolated quickly in what passed for Cora's mind as she quickly surveyed her prey. This one was tall, lean, and athletic, a far cry from the slob of a person who had found the glamour at the bottom of a bin of rusting magical items at the night market in a back alley in Paris. Her ties to alchemy were likely none, but her essence, at first blush, was most likely an improvement. "Hi," said Cora, placing her hand on the small of the woman's back. "Hey," she responded in an unexpectedly high-pitched voice. I like your necklace." Cora smiled. "It is quite something, and I am feeling a bit too overdressed with it on. Would you like to borrow it for a spell?" The woman, who Cora surmised was in her late 40s, but exuded a surprisingly vigorous energy, stared down at the green-colored stone, and then back up at Cora's eyes, before nodding. "Then it's settled," she said. This would be the riskiest transfer she had ever attempted. Normally, her stone changed hands when she was dormant, and she had little say over who put her on next. Once she had tried something similar, and it had not gone the way she had hoped. But hopefully she had learned from that experience, and this time would be different. Cora gently pulled the woman's hands, which were adorned in several silver rings, toward the necklace, until they had a hold of the chain. "No peeking," she said with a wink, and the woman closed her eyes as she lifted the glamour free of Cora's current host. If the third member of the prior evening's activities had been conscious, he would have witnessed a peculiar sight, as Cora's body somehow enveloped his wife the moment the chain fell around her neck, and in Cora's place on the other side, now there was only a decrepit-looking woman with mangy hair and loose skin. Cora opened her eyes and stared down at her former host, ignoring, for a moment, the buzzing sound in the back of her mind that was the new host. now trapped somewhere deep beneath the active glamour.
"You,"
said the woman in a barely audible whisper.
"Give it back. It's mine."
"I'm afraid not," said Cora, now firmly in control of her new host. "When you first found me, you had so much promise, and I was willing to provide you with a roadmap to untold power. And what did you do? You sacrificed everything for depravity and hedonism." The woman tried to continue, but her vocal cords had atrophied away to almost nothing. To be honest, Cora was surprised that the woman was still even able to sit up, but the complexities of glamour alchemy were less interesting to her in the moment than her immediate task, to find Kate, and ultimately, Trinity. I wish it could have turned out differently, but such is the way of things. Enjoy the remaining hours of your life, if you can. With that, Cora strode out of what turned out to be a Soho loft and into the bright light of the morning sun. Despite what she had told Kate last time, she wanted to check up on how the now almost sophomore was doing before her new host clawed her way up from the subconscious abyss and through the glamour in the river. "Hush, woman," Cora said in the back of her mind. "I promise you won't end up like that hag back there if you just do what I tell you. But right now I have some urgent housekeeping to take care of. So just ride along in silence, please, and you'll have your body back in due course." The protesting stopped, and Cora nodded in appreciation. A stop at the local newsstand established that it was August 16th, which meant that Kate should have been done with her mission at the castle. After a brief stroll to the village, she found a bench located an inconspicuous distance away from the girls' dorm room, and pretended to read the paper until Kate returned sometime in the late morning. She left briefly to grab lunch and a coffee, but after that did not emerge again. By 9, Cora had given up on learning anything particularly useful that day, and instead walked across Washington Square Park to a particularly decrepit bench in front of a particularly decrepit mid-block walk-up. Cora closed her eyes, and the woman underneath the glamour appeared to her, cowering in a corner of her mental space like a frightened tabby. Listen very carefully. When I am done speaking, in a few moments, I am going to squeeze the stone around my neck, and you will get control of your body back for the rest of the evening. However, tomorrow you will wake up and be back on this bench no later than 6:30 a.m., at which point you will squeeze the stone again. You will feel the weight of what was once my body envelop yours, but you will still be in control. I will permit you a few minutes to experience what it is like to have been me, but at 6:47 you will relinquish command again to me. If you follow these instructions to the T, I will make the same deal that I made with the woman you saw back in the loft, and I pray that you will not squander the opportunity like she did." Cora paused and waited for a response from the woman, before finally receiving it. "Good. I am glad I did not have to explain what will happen if you do not comply. I suspect this partnership will be a fruitful one. Until tomorrow." Cora grasped the glamour stone with her fingers and squeezed. Chapter 9. Kate. It was a surreal scene, watching Beatrice stagger into the SUV sopping wet. I half considered climbing in after her, so at least she wouldn't have to be alone until she got to the hospital. But from what I had learned about her during our brief conversation, she didn't seem like the type of person who wanted any help at this particular moment. I returned to the table to fetch the duffel bag and mysterious note, and instead was greeted by the familiar face of Zach's girlfriend, who had plopped herself down in Beatrice's seat and was sipping hot coffee from an oversized mug. "You again?" I stammered. "It's been 9 months. Leave me the F alone." "Of course, but first I wanted to offer you a mint." I stared at the strange woman as she extended her open hand across the metal mesh table. In the middle of her palm was a small, silvery mint. Given that it was broad daylight and we were seated in a crowded cafe, I didn't think there was anything particularly nefarious afoot, And so I gingerly took the offering, put it into my mouth, and started chewing. My head exploded in pain, forcing my eyes shut, while the rest of my body, from the neck down, felt like it was encased in a huge ice cube. I watched in the mental space inside my mind as Zach's girlfriend approached me down in the makeshift jail in the Botanical Gardens basement. I watched as she spoke to me and then handed me a golden mint, which I had taken so innocently. Then the scene shifted to my dorm room and a knock on the door. Again, it was her. And again she offered the silver mint. Remembering the pain from that first time I had regained my memories made the pain now even worse. I watched out of my own eyes as she explained why she was doing this. It was all about Trinity, or Beatrice, or whoever she was. It wasn't about me, it had never been about me. And then she had handed me the golden mint and tucked these memories back into the recesses of my head like a lost box forgotten somewhere in a dusty attic. I opened my eyes and stared at this woman with newfound hatred. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked. The woman, who hadn't even bothered to give me her name, took a long drag of her coffee before answering. She looked different from before, even now that I had these extra memories of her floating in my head. She seemed more youthful and livelier than last time, even though she couldn't have been more than 2 years my senior. Her hair was preternaturally blonde, although there was now an out-of-place streak of brown hair running down her brow. "Like I told you twice before, I need you to find Trinity." "I did! She literally just drove away to the hospital to have a baby. And her name is Beatrice Taylor, in case you were wondering."
"Well, that complicates things," said the woman. "What did you two talk about? Did she give you anything?"
No, I said, feeling the fire of rage that this woman had ignited within me. "I'm done with this. With you. Give me 3 of that other mint so I can forget all of this and go back to my simple life." I slammed my fist down on the table, and the oversized mug toppled on its side, sending the hot coffee through the metal slits and onto the top of the duffel bag that Beatrice left.
"What is that?" asked the woman,
and before I could do anything, she had retrieved the now sopping bag, unzipped it, and began pilfering its contents. What Beatrice had described to me as drugs were actually brightly green-colored squares wrapped in plastic, and the blonde woman quickly freed one from its casing and held it up to her face.
"Interesting," she said, giving the candy-like item a lick, which made her recoil.
"What?" I asked, drawing a raised eyebrow from the woman.
"Oh, now you want to talk?
You want to know what I think these are?
Tell me, what did she say to you about them?"
"Nothing. She just said that I had to sell every last dose of that. She called it knockoff Adderall. Then she gave me a cryptic note and drank something out of a weird vial." At this, the woman's eyebrows raised even higher.
"Trinity didn't happen to say whether what was in the vial was the same thing as this?"
I shook my head. "She's explained about as much to me as you have. Why is she so damn important?" Instead of answering my question, the woman popped the square into her mouth and began to chew.
Tastes like socks and bananas. And is that molasses?
I wonder why she added...
Oh.
The woman's voice suddenly went monotone, and her eyes went glassy. After a few moments, I noticed her breathing had slowed to once every 10 seconds, and then after another minute I couldn't tell if she was even breathing at all. Are you okay?" I asked, waving my palm in front of her face several times. "What's going on? Why aren't you—" Her hand suddenly lurched up and grabbed mine, and it felt like it was made of pure ice. Then she turned her unblinking gaze toward my face, and a small whisper escaped her lips.
"Focus on the past," she said. "Focus on the past. Focus on the past. Focus on the past."
The patrons around us started muttering, and I gave them a shoulder shrug as if to say I know, right? Finally, I did the only thing that made sense, and slapped her clean across the cheek. The woman let out a deep breath as I made contact, and when she locked eyes with me again, her old self had returned. You slapped me," she said softly. You didn't leave me any other choice. It was like you had become a statue, or you were having a severe allergic reaction. Then you started muttering to yourself.
What did I say? She asked,
her voice slightly trembling. You said, focus on the past, over and over and over again.
I see.
Without warning, the woman got up from the table, nearly knocking it over with her knees. For the second time that morning, I chased a strange woman down the street to get the answers I felt I was entitled to. You forgot something, I nearly screamed, and the woman turned back at me.
What?
My memories. Don't you want to wipe them again? Can't have Beatrice know what you're up to, right? The woman turned around suddenly, and before I knew it, she was inches away from my face. Keep quiet, she hissed in my ear, while hooking her arm around mine and steering me back to the cafe as if we were old schoolgirl friends.
You're angry, I get it, whatever. But that doesn't mean you can go around broadcasting everything that you know to the world. That's a quick ticket to the Mooney House basement. Now sit and finish your coffee.
She pushed me back into my seat, and I noticed, strangely, that the brown streak in her hair had spread down either side of her face and was now somehow mixing with her blonde hair to create a reddish hybrid. I took a sip of my now lukewarm coffee and froze as the now familiar taste of the dissolved golden mint registered on my tongue. But something about it was different this time.
You noticed the change? Asked the woman with a sinister smile. You're very perceptive. I like that.
I felt my body lock up, and my eyes seemed to focus only on the woman's lips as she continued speaking.
As this little episode has demonstrated, after a few times of being reawakened with a standard Letherium tablet, the subject will start to rebel, and that's not conducive to a proper working relationship, so a higher dosage is now necessary. It's for your own good, you see. I hope when we see each other tomorrow, though, you'll be in a better mood. But if not, then I have one more thing to say to you.
The scene in front of me froze, as if someone had hit pause on my brain and then everything from the past 20 minutes began playing in reverse. The only constant was the blonde woman in front of me, from whose lips a single word now escaped.
Comply.
I nodded and closed my eyes. Chapter 10. Kate again. It was a surreal scene, watching Beatrice stagger into the SUV sopping wet. I half considered climbing in after her, so at least she wouldn't have to be alone until she got to the hospital. But from what I had learned about her during our brief conversation, she didn't seem like the type of person who wanted any help at this particular moment. I returned to the table to fetch the duffel bag and mysterious note, and trudged back to my dorm room to contemplate my next move, trying my best to ignore the stabbing pain that had suddenly materialized in my head. Chapter 11. Cora. Cora regained consciousness on the bench at the appointed time and smiled. It seemed that her new host was smarter than her last several, and this pleased her. She quickly unlocked the front door of the walk-up building in front of the bench with some deft finger work and bolted up 5 flights of stairs to the top floor. A set of 3 doors greeted her on the landing, but they all went to the same place, her home for the past 100 years. One by one, she had been hosted by each of the former residents of the 3 apartments on this floor and the 4 on the floor below, and at the end of their usefulness, she had made certain arrangements to transfer ownership of all the units to a Bahamian shell corporation that she had set up in the 1930s. In terms of square footage, her abode was spacious, but other than her bedroom, she had deliberately kept the premises almost entirely Spartan, so as not to attract the wrong sort of attention. That, and there was no point in investing in interior decorating when there were years where she spent less than a fortnight here. Cora made her way to the study, which encompassed all of the C unit on the 5th floor. Mismatched bookcases lined one of the walls, and on the opposite wall was a long workbench that she had fashioned together from various pieces of wood over the years. Several jars were grouped together in one section, each containing different iterations of the golden litherium, for forgetting, and the silver morarium, for remembering. But there were obvious variations and twists she had developed. For example, increasing the amount of litherium in the mint extended the temporal range of memories to be forgotten. Or, more accurately, buried within the subconscious. And increasing the potency, in turn, increased the amount of morarium needed to resurface the memory. That was particularly helpful in the case of a similarly equipped adversary. Still others left the subject with a hint of what had happened, almost the equivalent of a lucid dream. Right outside her study was a small nook, where a laptop rested on a nightstand tucked inside. Cora was not one for technology, as it was hard to keep up with the non-stop developments when you might spend years locked at the bottom of a chest and wake up to find that MySpace was no longer a thing. That was one reason why she appreciated the utilitarian aesthetic and features of the Quest board, which had largely remained unchanged in the years since the board's creation. Having long since infiltrated Kate's Q-mail inbox, she nearly squealed with delight as she read the note from Trinity instructing the girl to meet her at the cafe that morning. With an assortment of mints stowed away in her bag, Cora quickly exited the apartment and headed to the meetup. She contemplated showing up early so that she could observe Trinity for herself, but Kate's continued recollection of her from that one night in Zach's dorm room put a damper on that plan. Instead, she had arrived just in time to watch a very pregnant and sopping wet woman stumble into an SUV and drive away. Good, she had thought. Trinity wouldn't be going anywhere far with a new baby to take care of. Her subsequent conversation with Kate wasn't as positive. The girl's anger at continually being memory wiped had finally materialized, as Cora had feared, and the whole enterprise was now teetering on the edge of the abyss. Fortunately, Beatrice, the blonde's true name, had provided a solution to the problem in the form of the concoctions she had left under the table. Cora had hoped beyond hope that the green-colored square was a distillation of the liquid in the vial that Kate had mentioned. But when she bit down on the gummy and tasted molasses and ageratum, Cora realized the truth. And then she fell into the depths. The alchemy at work was not designed to have such a pronounced effect on the subject. That she surmised later. Surely Trinity was not so stupid as to proliferate such powerful prima materia in a random manner, but because of her uniquely situated consciousness and, to put it bluntly, current lack of an actual brain, the gummy had plunged her straight into the maelstrom of borrowed memories and energies that she had survived on for so long. But then she heard her own voice, her true voice, from ages past, slice through the cacophony. "Focus on the past," her voice said. And she did. She focused on a singular moment, one that she had forgotten in her waking life. It was summer and the winds were warm. She raced along the shore of her little isle, hidden from the larger surrounding islands and the mainland by a gentle, rolling fog that always seemed to frustrate ship captains, no matter how favorable the conditions. It was here she lived and studied and loved, and all she wanted to do was to stay within the confines of the island for as long as she could. But this was the day that everything had changed. For when she had returned to her cottage at the top of the hill, the door had been shattered into 1,000 splinters, and the intruders had already laid waste to her possessions. But it wasn't until she ran through the destruction and out the back door that the real horror revealed itself. Because staked down in the dirt, his wrists and ankles and torso bloodied, was the man she had loved for years, too numerous to count. The invading trio stood at 3 separate points around him, and underneath were elaborate markings that must have taken weeks to construct. As they muttered words of ancient power, she unleashed a torrent of her own. But they had been prepared, and it ricocheted harmlessly off of their protective barrier, and had instead destroyed a nearby tree. She continued while they continued, but the strength of her magic and the shriek of her cries could do nothing to stop their perverted ritual. When it was over, he was gone, and even though she knew she should have run, she could not abandon him. And although she was strong, had been from the very beginning, there were 3 of them and only 1 of her. It had taken them more effort than they had anticipated, but they had subdued her as well, driven the stakes into her skin, circled her prone body, and placed a small necklace around her neck, a ring on one of her fingers, and a small metal bead into her mouth, which she had involuntarily swallowed. As their incantations reached her ears, she felt a sharp pain across her cheek. Cora opened her eyes and took in a huge breath of air, as if she had just surfaced from hundreds of feet below the waves. She was back at the cafe, and the girl was staring at her. "You slapped me," Cora said softly, while trying to grab hold of the memories she had just experienced. You didn't leave me any other choice. It was like you had become a statue, or you were having a severe allergic reaction. Then you started muttering to yourself. "What did I say?" she asked her. "You said focus on the past, over and over and over again." "I see." Already the details of that day on the Isle were fading, and Cora knew if she sat here any longer, they would be gone. So she fled, taking a few more of the gummies with her, and dropping one of the more powerful golden mints into Kate's coffee to wipe this morning's meeting clean. But the girl was persistent and would not go willingly into the night. And so, as a parting gift, Cora imparted the ultimate command and left her new thrall to ready the final stage of her plan. Chapter 12. Kate. My headache finally went away the next morning as I was jogging up the West Side Highway path, and it's there that I saw her again, Zach's girlfriend, running the opposite way. Except her hair was now a mix of strawberry blonde and brown, and although I wanted to yell at her for stalking me, somehow the only thing I could manage was a meek hello. "Kate," she said, "let's have a jog together, after you freshen your breath. Here, take a mint." "Okay," I said, ignoring the insult and quickly chewing the silver mint. I keeled over as the waves of memories flooded back into my head from our prior 2 meetings, and when I finally straightened up to scream at the woman for her manipulation, I felt all fight go out of me as soon as she held up her hand. "Not today," she said. "Today we will get off on the right foot. Let's go." The woman started running south, and I turned to follow her. "Okay," I replied, not really knowing what she meant. "But we need to be efficient while Beatrice is out of commission," she said. "Do you know what she named the baby?" How do you know?" "As I told you before, in your dorm room, I've had my eye on Beatrice for a long time. And you as well. I saw what happened yesterday. What did she say to you?" I wanted to protest the barrage of questions, but every time she asked me something, it was like something in my brain said I needed to just answer. "She told me to sell some weird bag of drugs, and to find a random number. I don't know what one has to do with the other, though." "Did you use the drug yourself?" "No, I didn't. I don't do drugs. Well, sometimes, but not that kind of drug." "If you haven't tried it, how do you know what kind of drug it is?" "Good point, I guess." "You'll be a much better saleswoman if you actually use the product, you know? So just try one when you get back to your room." We jogged the rest of the path in silence, and by the time we reached Battery Park City, I was drenched in sweat and filled with a desire to run back to my room and try one of the green squares. "This was fun," said the woman. "Let's meet same time tomorrow." Okay," I replied, and Zach's girlfriend squeezed my shoulder gently, which was weird. I walked back to my dorm room, puzzled both by the woman and by the memories now floating around in my head from months ago that didn't seem quite real and yet were just the same. Opening the duffel bag, I found it stuffed to the brim with mountains of individually wrapped squares. What the heck were these things? I freed one of them from its plastic and tentatively put it into my mouth. It tasted completely horrendous, but I couldn't focus on that for very long, because for the second time that day, my brain started going haywire. I glanced around the room frantically before my eyes locked in on one of my psychology books from last semester. Opening its cover, I began to read it, paragraph by paragraph, page by page, as if it was the most interesting thing in the entire world. But then about 10 pages in, I felt something click off in my mind, and I slowly closed the book. What the hell had just happened? I recounted the experience to Zach's girlfriend the next morning during our run.
Sounds intense, she said, like a souped-up version of Adderall.
Yeah, I said, but it didn't last that long. I was going to take another one to see if the same thing would happen, but didn't want to waste them.
Try one more this afternoon, the woman said, this time while holding the piece of paper with that number Beatrice gave you. See if you can direct your focused brain onto the number. Maybe you'll get a clue as to what it means.
Okay, I said. That sounds like a good idea. I returned to my dorm room, put on a timer, and did what she said. As my brain went into overdrive, I held up the piece of paper in front of my face. 949.278, I said out loud. 949.278. I repeated the number a few more times before quickly opening my laptop. Soon, my browser history was littered with random searches, Wikipedia articles, and numerology theories. But before I knew it, the drug wore off again, just as the timer hit 10 minutes, and I was no closer to solving this puzzle than before. So against my better judgment, I ate another one. The now familiar feeling of intense focus blocked out all other thoughts, and I sunk back into the research with a renewed vigor. I eliminated geographic coordinates, substitution ciphers, and bank account numbers. The problem was there were so many numeric systems that I feared I would have to eat the entire contents of the duffel bag before the solution would reveal itself. After the effect wore off again, I held firm on eating another until I reported back to Zach's girlfriend.
Did you count how many doses are in the bag? She asked the next morning as we jogged through the light rain.
No, I said.
Might be a good idea. She wants you to sell them, not use them.
Right, I said. For whatever reason, I always found myself agreeing with everything she told me.
If you bring me one tomorrow, though, I can try to analyze it myself and maybe figure out what she used to make them.
Okay, I said. That makes sense.
Don't use any more until I tell you, okay?
I nodded and did as instructed. A week later, Zach's girlfriend, who had oddly still not given me her name, showed up to our morning jog with a huge smile on her face.
I think I've finally cracked it, she said. But I'm going to need you to do some experiments for me.
Sure, but what happened to selling them like Beatrice wanted?
I have that covered, she said, handing me a thick envelope. She just wants the money, I think. So we'll give it to her and keep the squares for ourselves. Now, here's what you're going to do when you get home.
She explained in detail the tests she wanted me to run, which all involved me taking various doses of the drug, which she said contained a substance whose name she told me to forget. I took half a dose, and it predictably lasted 5 minutes. I took 2 doses immediately back to back and spent 20 minutes accidentally staring at my toenails. Things got interesting when I moved on to the more complicated part of the assignment. Taking 2 at a time didn't make me focus twice as hard. Instead, I woke up an hour later with no memory of anything that had happened in between. She wanted me to run that test twice, and another hour went into the waste bin of my subconscious. But it wasn't until the final phase that I had a real breakthrough. This involved creating a concentrate made by heating up a dozen doses until they liquefied on my dorm room hot plate. When the mixture cooled, I poured it into an empty water bottle and made my way to the student health center. I complained of lightheadedness, dizziness, and lack of energy to the nurse on call, and soon was hooked up to an IV in an exam room. Then, when I was sure that no one was coming back soon to check on me, I poked a small hole in the IV bag and poured some of the green concoction into the saline. I watched as the liquid slowly made its way out of the bag, down the tubing, and into my arm. For someone now used to having their mind regularly altered by magical substances, I still wasn't prepared for what happened next. I felt my eyes roll back into my head, and then I was falling through pure darkness. Or maybe I was just floating. It was hard to tell. Then I heard it. What I had been focusing on, what had been bothering me ever since Zach's girlfriend restored my memory during our first jog, why were there still pieces of our conversations that were just beyond my recollection? Tiny orbs of light floated around me, and I finally remembered what she had said to me. Find her, don't give up. I reached my hand into one of the orbs, and the words echoed in the void of my mind. It was soft and gentle, not a command but a suggestion. She had started small, urged me to find Beatrice and keep at it. It had fueled and encouraged my many months of searching. But then everything had changed somehow. I brushed against the last command, but all that came out was an undecipherable whisper. And unlike the other two, it was rock hard, like an over-tempered piece of steel, brittle and cracked. Holding the orb a little longer, I was shocked at what I heard next. It was a conversation between Zach's girlfriend and me at the coffee shop where I had met Beatrice earlier that morning. I saw myself storm out of the cafe after her, only to be steered back to my seat. I saw what my distracted self had not. Her closed fist hovering over my coffee while I had stared at her reddish hair. I heard her lecture me while I sat there helplessly, and finally heard the word contained within the orb, comply. The command reverberated in the inner recesses of my mind, and while it still held power over me, I saw in its absoluteness a way out. I opened my eyes and was back in the exam room. Despite feeling like it had been days since I was last awake, only a minute of time had passed. I quickly unhooked the IV from my arm, fetched a couple of bandages from a nearby drawer, and snuck out of the health center through a back staircase. The memory of the new conversation replayed over and over in my head as I walked back to my dorm room. She had been so confident and so cocky that she had absolute control over my memory and over me, that she had gotten sloppy. And I was going to make her pay. Chapter 13. Cora. Cora stared at the 1870s-era mirror in her apartment, its silver frame nearly dull. The same could not be said for her hair, which was now nearly red to the roots. This troubled her greatly. It had been so long since she had been able to stay in control for weeks on end that she wondered whether her host was even still alive. She couldn't remember the last time one had died while she was in control, but she was quite certain that she went dormant soon after it had happened. As much as she wanted to interrogate the brown-haired woman underneath about her unusual pliancy, Cora had other things on her mind. Her morning jogs with Kate had been productive, but she felt like the girl was holding something back from her. After a month or two more of testing, Cora had concluded that the focus enhancer was incredibly watered down, her own experience with it notwithstanding. Whatever other alchemy Beatrice had at her disposal, it was not on full display here. So the duo had moved on to the mystery of the 6-digit number. But not before Cora had done a full memory wipe on the girl back to that morning at the cafe. A fresh start was what they needed, she had decided. And besides, Kate probably didn't even want to remember all the different ways she had been experimented on. Once they fell into a new routine, spinning classes in a basement studio in Alphabet City, it had only taken a few more weeks for Kate's brain to finally seize upon a promising lead, a Dewey Decimal number. Except that was only the beginning. Because as it turned out, there was no electronic record of any books in any library in the city with that number. Poor Kate spent more weeks under Cora's firm direction, visiting almost every public and private library. The girl hadn't complained, as she had no say in the matter, But Cora had eventually noticed a tiny shift in her demeanor, which troubled her. Finally, they had struck pay dirt in March. A professor had checked the book out of a tiny research library in Soho that had not been properly documented. Cora had sent Kate to the professor during his office hours, posing as a student interested in taking his class next semester. She had complained that he was more interested in her physique than her mental acuity, but Cora had coaxed her back to his office for another session the following day. Incredibly, the old man kept the book lying out in the open, and Kate had nabbed it when he had stepped out to go to the bathroom. She glanced down at the armoire below the mirror at the aged, leather-bound book. Inside were the diary entries of Rita von Asch, one of the founders of the Worshipful Company of Alchemists, better and simply known as the Guild from 1777. Its contents were somewhat interesting, but for Cora, who had lived through a portion of that year, it was a disappointment. She could see why Beatrice had been interested in finding it, though. If one were industrious and cunning enough, one could piece together the secret ingredients of Rita's compulsion ink. But Cora had no need for such sophomoric alchemy. A twinge of pain suddenly erupted in her thigh, and Cora nearly doubled over. She instinctively grabbed the stone to steady herself, and the sting dissipated. So the woman was alive after all, she surmised, and not happy about her prolonged imprisonment. She could empathize with the feeling of powerlessness, but now was not the time to hand back over the reins. Not until she learned what Beatrice had drunk from that vial. Chapter 14. Kate. It happened at night the first time. Zach's girlfriend had shown up at my dorm room door with a cup of tea and a pep talk to get me through her latest crazy experiment, except that when I had finished the tea, I felt my mind go numb, and when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't remember anything about her, apart from that same night after the corpse flower quest. But fortunately, I had been waiting for this moment. The next afternoon, like every afternoon for the past several months, I went down to my mailbox and found a letter addressed to me and sent by me. Inside were the same set of instructions I had been sending myself every day as a contingency plan. They told me how to access the inner recesses of my subconscious, where my lost memories were waiting like an old friend. Another trip to the student health center later, and my mind had been restored. Unlike the first time when she had only tried to take one memory, this time there were dozens. Every morning we had gone jogging, and afterward she had commanded me to do something. But although that command still lingered in my head, this latest mind wipe had washed away some of its power. I pushed the command to the limit as Zach's girlfriend pushed me to find the book. Yes, that stupid number was for a book hidden somewhere in the city. After weeks and weeks of trudging into every single library in all 5 boroughs, I had finally found it on the desk of a dirty old professor in my own department. "I found it," I had written to Beatrice on Q-mail, but not before handing the book over to Zach's girlfriend for her to study first. A week later, I received both a response back from Beatrice and the book back from the now completely redhead, who showed up unannounced at my dorm room with a bottle of rum to toast the results of a successful scavenger hunt. One sip later, and I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and without any knowledge as to how I had acquired the book. After yet another round of memory reacquisition, I locked myself in my room to prepare for my second meeting with Beatrice. The chipper girl who had randomly stumbled into this world of quests and magic had sadly been destroyed by the schemes of a woman drunk on her power over me. But in front of Ms. Taylor, I needed to play a different part. The morning of our rendezvous arrived, and I, of course, slept through my alarm. I quickly stuffed the book in my pink backpack and ran the entire way to the coffee shop. "I'm so sorry I'm late," I said, as I nearly collapsed into the empty seat across from Beatrice. She looked decidedly not pregnant this time, so there was no risk of her running out on me before I got some answers. "It's fine. I take it you have the book?" "Yup," I said, in my fake, eager voice, as I dumped my backpack on the table and began rifling through it, before withdrawing the diary.
Excellent. How is the old professor? Still a disgusting lecher? I hope he didn't leer at you too much. You're just his type.
My eyes widened. Wait, how did you know that he had... Oh, this was just a test. Again. A test that had wasted months of my life. And for what? So she could impart her precious wisdom to me? I wanted to wipe the smile she flashed me off her face by punching her right in the jaw.
Of course. You think you're ready for the big time already? Did you read the book?
I did. Was up all night. Then tried to take a quick cat nap, but slept through my alarm. That's why I was late.
Then you know that this wasn't something I would leave to the likes of you. If I didn't already know, I could get it back.
I almost lost it at this last comment. The arrogance of this woman nearly rivaled that of my other favorite person, and between the two of them, they had made my life a living hell. But now was not the time to lose my temper, not when I had finally made some progress.
Oh, don't be so sensitive. You did well regardless. Here's your reward.
Beatrice set a stack of iron tokens on the table and took the book. I stared at the coins for several seconds and again contemplated violence before grabbing the lot of them and stuffing them into my backpack. Thanks. Clearly, my displeasure was still very much evident, because Beatrice cocked her head slightly, as if I should be grateful for the worthless pile of metal.
And because you were up all night, here's something extra.
She withdrew a small green square wrapped in plastic from her pocketbook and slid it across the table. It looked identical to the other green squares she had given me last time, of which I had eaten probably 3/4. What's this?
A little something to help you next time you need to finish a paper. It lasts only a couple of hours, so don't waste it. But it's one of my better buffs, if I do say so myself.
A buff? Was that supposed to be clever? But the promise of a couple of hours of focus got me intrigued, and I played dumb.
You don't know what a buff is?
I shook my head.
Okay, fine. Think of it as a magic version of the Adderall you've been dealing in your dorm for me, which it is.
Oh. Oh! Wow, thanks.
You're welcome. Don't waste it, though. I don't hand those out to everyone for free, you know.
I won't. So, what's my next assignment? Do you have the next volume of the diary? I have so many questions.
Easy there, Tiger. I'll be in touch. Go get some sleep. You're starting to sound like a chipmunk.
I nodded, grabbed my stuff, and left the coffee shop. It took only a few blocks for the other woman to appear in the distance, and I cursed under my breath as I approached her.
How did it go? The redhead said.
It was... I started to answer, but paused and instead waited for the familiar echo of comply in the back of my head to sound. But it didn't. Fine. It was fine.
What do you mean, fine?
Again, no command. I smiled on the inside, but decided to answer anyway. She was the one who hid the book. It was all a test.
I see, said the woman.
I couldn't tell if it was the repeated memory wiping I had undergone, but it seemed to me that other parts of the woman were also starting to change in addition to her hair.
But you passed.
Yes, I did. And then she sent me on my way. Put me in a holding pattern.
That's not ideal, but I suppose it's the best we can do right now. Let me know when she contacts you again.
Finally, at that direct imperative, the command reappeared, and I heard the word okay escape from my lips.
Good,
said the woman, who turned to walk the other way, but then suddenly pivoted and looked back at me.
Is there anything else you're not telling me? She asked,
as if realizing that she wasn't as precise with her prior questioning as she should have been. Had this been several weeks ago, I would have been forced to answer truthfully, but not today. Nope, that's it. Satisfied that I had obeyed her, the woman turned back and walked back to whatever hell had spawned her. Chapter 15. Cora. Cora woke up at 4 a.m. in her four-poster 19th century bed, covered in sweat. Quite frankly, sleep was not something she was accustomed to after so many years of unsuitable hosts. There had been too many times where she had closed her eyes in one decade and opened them in another, that she preferred to spend the limited time that was usually at her disposal in the service of her goal. But nothing had been usual about the last 6 months. She couldn't recall a time when she had found a host that made her almost feel like a real human again. And that worried her. The copy of Rita's diary that she had transcribed by hand sat next to her, half buried under the cotton sheets she had bought in Scotland during the tail end of the Industrial Revolution. It took a second for Cora to recall that she had been reading the book in bed before she had drifted off into what had become an amalgam of nightmares. Some were familiar. An extended interrogation in an underground black site somewhere in Eastern Europe that had ended with her arm being hacked off. That beheading during the French Revolution, and then, of course, that time she was burned at the stake in Salem. The only positive thing about her current state was that any physical damage to her glamour self was erased just as soon as the next time she was activated. But the pain still remained afterward. Always. Yet other nightmares were foreign to her. Cora still had lifetimes of memories she had yet to reclaim, but still these were not hers. But like hers had, they stretched back beyond the normal lifespan. A woman, stabbed and left for dead in an alleyway in 5 Points. Another woman, waking in an unfamiliar room with the taste of blood in her mouth. And then the last one, the most horrific of all. A woman screaming in the dark as her life force flowed out of her. Cora shuddered and pushed herself up from the bed. She had little time to dwell on the past, when the present was already fraught with so much unknown. 3 train transfers later, and she was walking up the staircase at the random half-empty middle school where the council had recently relocated the raid board to. After listening out for any other potential questers, she approached the bulletin board and began perusing the latest jobs, which were mostly bust. But then she saw it and nearly did a double-take. Urgent. Need retrieval of ink and pen from estate sale in Bed-Stuy. Contact me for more info. Cora couldn't afford to believe in coincidences, and was therefore troubled by the confluence of the discovery of the diary and this raid suddenly appearing. And it wasn't as if she needed the ink to achieve the power of compulsion, but the thought of someone else acquiring that power troubled her, or a collection of someone's. And so she took the note and replaced it with an identical one, save for replacing the contact information with her own. 3 days later, when she saw Beatrice approach the dead drop, where she had left the altered raid instructions, Cora smiled. A few blocks away, she found Kate waiting next to the West 4th Street subway, as instructed. "The first part of the trap is set," Cora said, "and now we go to set the second." "Okay," said Kate, who seemed nonplussed by the plan. Not that she could blame her. In time, most of her external conscripts had wilted under her hand, and it had been long enough where the same would be expected from the girl. After a silent train ride, the pair reached the 5-story walk-up a few minutes before 1:30, and Cora hit the buzzer for 5A. Upstairs, a wrinkly old man in glasses greeted them at the door.
"Hello,"
he said in a raspy voice.
"You here for the estate sale?"
"Yes, we are," Cora replied. "Can we come in?" The man peered at Cora through the thick lenses of his glasses, before noticing Kate standing silently behind her.
"Yes, just need to get a name for the ledger."
Cora frowned. She didn't like giving out her name to random strangers, and in fact, Kate still didn't know it. But a thorough cleaning after this raid was in order anyway, so she complied. "I'm Cora, and this is Kate behind me."
There's 2 of you? You're a looker, aren't you?" he said,
pointing at Kate.
"And you're not so bad either. Must be my lucky day."
Cora shook her head at the insult. By any century's standard of beauty, she was at least twice as attractive as Kate, but didn't have time to argue with the old geezer.
It sure is, she simply said instead,
and walked past him into an apartment that made her own look Spartan. Every inch of the small foyer was packed with mismatched bookcases, bureaus, hutches, and shelves, each holding collections of the most random assortment of items and knickknacks one could imagine.
"How do you live like this?"
Cora said to the man when she returned from the equally crowded bedroom.
"I don't," croaked the old man, who had settled into a weathered chair near the door. "This was my sister Doreen's apartment. Hadn't seen her in years, and I guess I won't see her again. Good riddance."
"That's a nice story," said Cora, ignoring the old man's subtle prompting to ask about his awful relationship with his sister. "But we're looking for something in particular. Do you know where Doreen kept her ink and pen?"
"Oh, sure. It's right next to the 6,000th pile of crap over there. You can't miss it."
The man grinned at Cora, and she resisted the urge to punch him in the face. "Fine, I'll do it myself." Cora walked into the bedroom and closed her eyes. She would have preferred to do this another way, but time was of the essence, and she surmised it wouldn't take very much energy to perform the necessary ritual. A buzzing sound suddenly permeated throughout the small room, as if a small colony of bees had woken up from their slumber. Cora followed its trail over to a roll-top desk in the corner of the room, pushed it open, and stepped back just in time to avoid the stacks of crap that had been stuffed underneath. Still, the buzzing got louder as she tossed piles of paper, faded envelopes, and old issues of TV Guide, until at last she discovered the prize. 4 fountain pens paired with 4 bottles of dark black ink that were tucked away in the back recesses of the desk. "What's that?" asked Kate, and Cora nearly jumped at the girl's sudden appearance. "You read the diary, right?" Kate nodded. "Then you know what this is, what Rita Von Ash used this for." "But how did this crotchety old woman manage to acquire so much of it?" "Good question, but that's a puzzle for another day. Right now, we have work to do." Cora picked up a couple of the pieces of paper she had tossed aside and set them on the desk. She then unscrewed the fountain pen, poured a good portion of the ink into its reservoir, and reassembled the implement. The ink flowed easily from the nib, but she had to be careful in her word choice. "What are you doing?" Kate asked. "Writing a note to your erstwhile employer, to set a meeting." "And you think she's just going to show up?" Cora smiled. "Of course. That's the beauty of the ink. Take a look." She handed Kate the note, who read it out loud. "Beatrice, meet me at the Belvedere Fountain on April 10th at 10 p.m. "That's it? Nothing happened?" "Well, of course not. It's not directed to you, is it? But the one under that is." Cora gently pulled the note free from the girl's hands, revealing a second piece of paper underneath. Unfortunately for Kate, the ink's alchemy began to work almost instantly, as her eyes registered that her own name was written at the top of the missive. She walked out of the bedroom without another word, and Cora heard the front door slam shut a few moments later. "See you around," said Cora with a smirk. Truth be told, she was beginning to come around on the ink's usefulness. It paled in comparison to her own power, but being able to issue commands from afar did have its own set of positives, and that would certainly help facilitate her meeting with Beatrice. That reminded her. She needed to complete the last part of her ruse. She was eager to unleash a bit of chaos into the Guild's careful planning, and outfitting one of their adversaries with a bit of leftover ink was just the ticket. After stashing a half-filled bottle of ink and 2 of the fountain pens inside the box spring, Cora returned to the living room.
"Where'd she run off to?"
asked the old man, who seemed disappointed that only Cora remained. "Term paper," she said. "Anyway, I'll take it."
"Take what?"
"Everything. How does $400 sound?" The old man paused for a second, before his nearly toothless mouth broke into a smile.
"It sounds perfect."
"Great.
I'll be back tomorrow morning to get everything. Can I get your name for the check?
Sure. It's Morton. Morton Ryerson.
Well, thank you very much, Morton. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cora withdrew the pen and a third sheet of paper from her pocket and added the man's name to the top of the already written note before setting it gently in his hands and walking out the door. Chapter 16. Kate. Go back to your apartment and forget what happened today during our raid, the noted said. Simple, but effective. But even after 15 minutes of the IV drip, which I now administered myself, I still didn't remember being forced to leave that hoarder's dream of an apartment. Everything up until reading that piece of paper, I eventually recalled, though, including her name. Cora. It troubled me that there was more magic out there of such strength. It was bad enough being memory wiped one way, but now I had to worry about this ink, too. I knew that I was in over my head, and I knew that I needed help. Fortunately, I already had acquired a second mentor, one who was powerful in her own right, and one from whom I was going to take every ounce of power when the time was right. Beatrice's next task for me after locating the diary was piecing together evidence from other sources of Rita's handiwork at Valley Forge. That had meant poring through nearly indecipherable microfished pages from the diaries of various Revolutionary War generals, and then cross-referencing those entries against Rita's own. It was mind-numbing work because Rita had been very good at keeping out of sight, and of course her own husband's diary had coincidentally not survived the intervening centuries. At 6 p.m., I had regained enough of my faculties and memories to resume my research, which is exactly when I received a message from Beatrice. Meet me at West 4th Street Station tomorrow at 9 a.m. What for? I texted back. Going to Bed-Stuy for a raid. No, it had to be a coincidence. There was no way that Beatrice also knew about. But of course she did. She had read the diary probably many times. She knew about the ink, and she had probably been waiting years for this opportunity. And so had Cora, which is why we had gone there today. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I was the unfortunate piece of cheese in the middle. Or a ball of yarn. Or maybe I was the mouse and they were both cats? Honestly, my brain was too fried to process this latest development. But thankfully, I still had one final trick up my sleeve that I had been hesitant to use. The little green square had sat in my desk for weeks now, untouched and unused. Because of what I had been able to do with the diluted one, I was admittedly afraid of how powerful the full-strength version would be. But now was not the time to be timid. I broke off the tiniest of corners of the buff and started to chew it. It tasted even worse than the ones I had been eating for months, if that was possible. I finally swallowed and waited for the effect to kick in. Nothing happened. Throwing caution to the wind, I cut the thing in half with a knife I had stolen from the student cafeteria and ate one of the pieces. Even conditioning my mind so many times still didn't prepare me for the intensity of what followed. It was different than the tunnel into my subconscious I had been creating with the IV drip, almost as if someone was placing my brain into a vice and forcing a single thought into it. That first time, it was the photocopied pages of the Valley Forge journals that were resting nearby. I tore into them with such vigor that I had pieced together the dozen hidden references to Rita that I had missed during my first review. After an hour, the effect had still not worn off, but fortunately I redirected my focus elsewhere. My friends had papers due this week, so I wrote them. Then I found a random freshman struggling with calculus in the lounge on the 3rd floor, so I did his problem set too, even though I didn't even pass pre-calc in high school. After that, it was still only 1 a.m., and the focus buff still showed no signs of wearing off, so I returned to the room to tackle one final project. The note that Cora had written to me in the compulsion ink was locked away in my bottom desk drawer, and I gingerly removed it, careful not to glance at the writing. I was no engineer, but at the moment I felt like I could take on anything, and so I spent the next 5 hours poring through scientific papers on the solubility of gallic acid, until I must have passed out. When my phone alarm went off at 8:30, I slowly opened my eyes, and it was as if someone had stuck silly putty in between the neurons of my brain. I couldn't focus enough mental energy to change into new clothes, to figure out how to get to the bathroom, or even to tie my shoes. It was as if the focus buffs had overwritten the proper workings of my brain chemistry. Fortunately, I still had one piece left, but I knew I couldn't handle another bender like last night, so I quickly turned on the hot plate and dropped the buff into my little pot. After several minutes, it eventually liquefied, and I poured the substance into a flask that my friend Lainey had bought all of us on prom night. I took a tiny sip, and the gears in my brain finally started cranking again. Securing the flask inside my jacket, I ran off to meet Beatrice at the subway. She wasn't mad at my tardiness, said she had built in some extra time for us to get to our destination. After several subway transfers and several surreptitious sips of the liquid buff, Beatrice asked about my research, and I told her, perhaps a little too eagerly. I made a mental note to keep quiet, lest I accidentally reveal what else I had done, but not before asking for more buffs. Beatrice glared at me, and I could tell whatever trust existed between us was slowly eroding. Still, she handed me her last one and chided me not to waste it. Don't worry, I thought. I won't. We disembarked in Bed-Stuy, and for the first time that morning, Beatrice was in a rush. I wanted to tell her that there was no need to run, that she was already too late. Instead, I played dumb. Where are we going anyway? I asked, matching her now brisk strides.
The requester wants us to procure certain items from an estate sale, Beatrice said.
That's it? Couldn't they have gone themselves?
Sure, but when you're flush with tokens, why would you stoop to such labor yourself when you can sit back in your comfy chair and let others do the dirty work for you?
Makes sense, I thought. But whose dirty work we were doing was what worried me. I had no idea what Cora had ended up doing with the ink. She didn't need it, as she had other means of magical control, but she clearly didn't want Beatrice to find it.
We're here, said Beatrice, when we arrived at the familiar 5-story walk-up with a rusty fire escape.
She rang the buzzer, and we walked into the deserted lobby, where Beatrice approached the stairway, before stopping. "What are you doing?" I asked.
"Listening. Shh."
After a minute, Beatrice retreated and walked towards the mailboxes at the back of the lobby and began rummaging through her purse. With her momentarily distracted, I took the opportunity to recharge with a quick sip of the green liquid. I hoped that after this raid was over, I could just sit in my bed and let my mind return to normal on its own. But if not, I needed to start thinking of a backup plan. "Why aren't we going up?" I asked.
"Because I need to give you something first," said Beatrice. "I said that our employer probably was just using their money to hire us instead of getting their lazy ass down here, but there's also a chance that someone else knows what's for sale here, so we need to be adequately prepared for that probability."
She removed what appeared to be a knife from her bag and unsheathed it from its leather scabbard. The smooth metal of the blade caught the light from the dirty fluorescent fixture overhead, and suddenly the vestibule was 5 times brighter. After a few quick stabs in the air, Beatrice resheathed the weapon. "Here," she said, handing the knife to me, and my eyes widened as I grasped it. It wasn't that I was afraid of weapons. I had fired my fair share of shotguns out on my grandma's farm when I was younger. No, this weapon was something else entirely. Maybe it was because of the buff or something else Cora had done to me, but I could feel the power the knife possessed, and it scared me to my core. "Why are you giving that to me?" I asked. My mouth began to tremble and my thoughts began to slow as I continued holding the weapon. Thankfully, noticing my distress, Beatrice quickly intervened and took back the blade.
"You know what? On second thought, why don't you let me hold on to that?"
I was both relieved to be rid of the weapon, but disturbed that this woman had something that felt so powerful. How did she get it, and what did it do? But now was not the time for such direct questions, and as Beatrice climbed the stairs ahead of me, I took another sip and focused on shutting my mouth. The door to 5A was slightly ajar when we arrived, and when we stepped inside, I couldn't believe my eyes. The place was empty, bare. All of Doreen's crap was gone, except that ugly leather chair and her brother sitting in it. My pulse quickened as I worried whether he would recognize me from yesterday and ruin everything. But when he called me a looker for the second time in 2 days, I breathed a sigh of relief. Cora had taken care of one loose end by wiping the old man's memory from yesterday, and another by apparently buying the entire contents of the apartment lock, stock, and barrel. But she hadn't taken care of them all. We interrogated Morton for a bit, and he coughed up his sister's letter written in compulsion ink that had forced him to deal with her estate, which I so wanted to get my hands on, but Beatrice beat me to it. Afterwards, she sprinted off into the bedroom, hoping that somehow Cora had been dumb enough to leave the ink here for her to find. I found Beatrice sobbing when I walked into the bedroom a few moments later, after another refill of focus, and immediately took back what I thought about Cora. "Hey, look at that!" My mouth blurted out the words before my brain could tell it not to. What the hell was the matter with me? "What?" asked Beatrice. "There's a bulge in the box spring, right next to you." Again, mouth word vomiting, brain not thinking. Beatrice sprung back to life and tore open the top of the box spring with her knife to reveal a Ziploc bag underneath with 2 fountain pens and a small bottle of ink. My heart sank. The power of that ink could have been mine, and with it I could have guaranteed my freedom from Cora's puppet strings. My internal brooding was interrupted by Beatrice suddenly giving me a huge hug. I was so shocked by the sudden display of affection that my arms hung in the air behind her back, before I eventually returned the embrace. "You're welcome. I didn't really do anything, though. Except, well, everything." "You did, though. Anyway, let's book it out of here before the guild realizes what they've missed." "Sure, but what's the guild?" I didn't care about whatever the guild was. I only wanted to get the hell out of here and recuperate before Cora paid me another visit, and before Beatrice started using me to experiment with her newly acquired alchemy. You don't want to know. It took the rest of the vial to get me back to my dorm room. A few times I cut it close and watched the world go in and out of focus. A quick sip restored everything to its normal working order, but as the green liquid gradually decreased, my heart started racing more and more. I collapsed into my bed just as the last dose ran out and let the confluence of the last 2 days pull me down into slumber. But when I awoke at 4 a.m., it still felt like a 100-ton weight had lodged itself in my head. I would have gone back to sleep had I not noticed an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Literally crawling on my hands and knees, I reached the intruding object and discovered a dozen green gummy squares inside to go with the one Beatrice had given me. I greedily unwrapped one as quickly as I could and was about to eat it whole when I stopped myself. How did I get here? How had I fallen so fast? And what would happen if I continued down this path? I left the envelope by the doorway and somehow pulled myself back into bed. Trying to collect my thoughts was like trying to catch a jar of fireflies with nothing but a torn net. The focus buffs taunted me from across the room, like a siren taunting Odysseus. Sleep eventually reclaimed me, but by the next morning still nothing had changed. As I saw it, I had 3 options. I could keep eating the green squares indefinitely. I could tell Beatrice the truth and admit that I was a mole sent by a mysterious blonde but now redhead named Cora. Or, and this was the least appealing choice, I could tell Cora the truth and ask her to use her power to fix my head. I spent another day in bed, subsisting on a frozen TV dinner I had bought my first week of school, and the half a bottle of vodka, which was the only liquid left in my mini fridge. By the second morning, I was running out of time. My stomach ached from hunger, and my brain couldn't come up with any other ideas because I was expending all my energy just trying to think the simplest of thoughts. Finally, I gave up and retrieved the envelope. While one of the buffs melted down into liquid, I ate half of another, and it was as if I had been plunged into a pool of frozen water. I snapped to alertness and directed my focus onto temporary and long-term solutions to my problem. One trip to Goodwill later, and I was grinding one of the buffs with a mortar and pestle into a fine powder. I snorted some of it, and it got me through almost the entire day before I came back down. setting aside a quarter of the buffs for memory recovery, and another quarter for research purposes left me with about 2 weeks' worth of powder. So I went to work. I spent a day in the bowels of the chemistry library, finishing my research on gallic acid solubility. Then the following day in a purloined lab testing ink extraction methods and procedures on notes I had written with ink purchased from a flea market under the Brooklyn Bridge. After a day wasted hemming and hawing, I retrieved Cora's note from the bottom of my dresser. Using a pair of tweezers, I gently lowered the paper into the mixture of water, sodium carbonate, isopropyl alcohol, and a sprinkling of other reagents. When the beaker didn't immediately shatter into 1,000 pieces, I breathed a little easier and left for a few hours to attend to other business. Beatrice's Upper East Side apartment was incredibly easy to find, which made me wary. I watched the front of her building for the rest of the day, and all I found out was that her very attractive nanny was most likely sleeping with her husband. The next morning, with the ink still very much adhered to the note, I returned to see a different woman pushing the blue baby carriage around the block. Night fell, and finally Beatrice appeared, exiting the building through the surface door, before quickly stepping into a waiting car. As much fun as it would be to engage in a high-speed chase through the city, I left her to her evening escapades and retreated for the time being. Days passed and the ink still hadn't separated. I had used up the buffs set aside for research and was perilously close to finishing the ones in the memory recovery reserve. So one final experiment was in order. Wrapping the tourniquet around my arm was like old hat at this point, and I didn't even flinch when I stuck the syringe into my arm. Unlike the original watered-down buffs that had made me retreat into my subconscious, I was wide awake when this version kicked in. Like a thirsty desert traveler searching for a single drop of water, my mind spun, looking for a thought to focus on. More, I thought. I need more. Chapter 17. Cora. Cora left the note with Beatrice's doorman and took a stroll through the upper reaches of the park before making her way back down to the rendezvous point. Sure, she could have used Kate as an intermediary, but she wasn't yet ready to burn her mole. Besides, she wanted to give the girl and her mind a break for a few weeks, lest she crack under the multitude of stresses she was under. The pond was quiet today as Cora walked across the bridge toward the fountain. She recalled a day here long ago that had not been quiet, when a different woman had worn her necklace, and she still had her blonde hair. But today the only blonde was the woman waiting for her on the bench, who was staring straight ahead at the figure on the top of the fountain. "Hello, Beatrice," said Cora as she sat down on the other end of the bench. At the sound of her words, the woman's eyes finally blinked again. "The ink," Beatrice said, her breathing forced and her voice quivering. "How did you get it?" Cora smiled. "The same way you got it. You should really be thanking me. I did all of the dirty work. I doubt you would have found it in that mess." "So you're the one who beat me to it. Why didn't you take all of it?" "Because I don't need it. You do." Beatrice's facial expression turned to confusion. "Then why don't you just give me what you took?" "Nice try," said Cora, laughing. "I gave you just enough so that you won't use it as a crutch. Too much power would easily go to your head. You need to be resourceful if you're going to have any hope against them." "Who?" "I think you know." Beatrice slowly shifted her weight back, as if she was planning to run, for all the good that would do her. "Relax, I'm not with them. In fact, you and I are working toward a mutual goal." "Which is what exactly?" asked Beatrice. The woman's hands drifted slowly to the purse at her side, and Cora wondered whether the relic that Beatrice was rumored to have found was inside. "The complete and total destruction of the guild. They tried to kill you, right? Not far from here, actually. Yes, I know all about that. Don't look so surprised. Why do you need my help, then? You seem to know everything. You have your own supply of the ink." Cora considered the question. It was true that she had more than enough power at her disposal, That was never the issue. Time and agency were what she lacked. But both she had full measure of recently, thanks to her incredibly compliant host. Still, there was always the gnawing feeling in the back of her mind, if she still actually had a physical one, that in an instant those would be taken from her, like they had been so many times before. "The guild has many pieces on the board," she said. "I've been trying to gather my own to counter them for many years. Unfortunately, it's been a non-linear process. But you could change everything." It was an exaggeration, to be sure, but Cora had spent lifetimes learning the subtle art of manipulation, and ego-stroking was among her most useful tools. "I'm glad you think so highly of me," said Beatrice, "but I'm still not sure what you want me to do. I don't feel like getting stabbed again." "Don't worry," said Cora. "I'm not asking you to step into the lion's den. Not yet, anyway. We're both playing the long game here, and there are still many moves left to be played. I just wanted to meet you, face to face, to take my measure of you." Beatrice scoffed, before abruptly getting up and starting to walk away. "I don't need anyone taking my measure. I'm getting along just fine. Thank you."
"Sit down,"
said Cora, and the blonde nearly staggered backward onto the bench. "Do I have your attention now?" Beatrice nodded, a look of trepidation in her eyes. "Good," said Cora. "As I said, I don't need anything from you now, only that you will be receptive to my help and aid in the years to come. Is that going to be an issue for you?" "No," said Beatrice. "I'll take all the help I can get." "That's what I wanted to hear," said Cora, cracking a smile. "Oh, okay," said Beatrice. "Can you at least tell me why you hate them too?" "You already know too much about the world," said Cora. "Best you don't know any more. But suffice it to say, they took everything from me, and I want it back." Cora pushed herself up and headed to the passageway that ran under the terrace, and as expected, Beatrice trotted after her. "Wait," said Beatrice. "When will I see you again?" "You won't. This city has many eyes and ways of hearing, and too many lead back to the guild. In the future, I'll be in touch through more subtle means." "Mint?" She extended her hand toward Beatrice, and in her palm was a red, flat disc. The woman took it without further prompting, and Cora watched as the last 2 hours of Beatrice's memories dissolved into a wisp of smoke. Chapter 18. Kate. I don't remember much from that night. I remember the feeling of desperation as I poured the second-to-last portion of the focus liquid into the syringe. I remember sticking the needle in my thigh. I remember frantically poring through printouts in a dingy government building basement that I had snuck into. I remember the feeling of the cold water hitting my face, and finally coming to in the living room of Beatrice's downtown apartment. I looked at her and her unkempt hair and the men's shirt she was wearing before my eyes fell upon her pocketbook. The same thought that formed in my head also formed in Beatrice's, but I was faster, and a second later I was pointing the unsheathed dagger at her, my hand shaking almost beyond control. "More. I need more." The dagger's ivory handle radiated an uncanny energy, and I so wanted to drop it on the floor and never touch it again. "More what, Kate? You know, you could have just called. Now why don't you just give me that? The buffs! I need more!" "Oh. I made the last one into a powder so it would last longer, and you wouldn't think I was an addict by asking for more so soon. Bought a mortar and pestle at Goodwill, snorted a little bit to see what would happen and passed out. Woke up, did a little more, tried to finish paper, then it wore off again, but not before a thought occurred to me. I needed to inject it, so I went to the health center, got into the exam room, and then took off with some syringes and tourniquets before the nurse came in. That did the trick, but I only had a little left, so I needed to find you." Even in my unnerved state, I was still able to twist the truth to my will. She didn't need to know how far I'd fallen, how much my mind was now subservient to the magic she had created. She pleaded with me to drop the knife, and of course I wanted to. I didn't know how she could stand to hold the thing or keep it so close to her, but I held firm until she agreed to my demands. I flicked the knife around and offered her the handle, and the energy emanating from this end of the weapon was even more terrible. In the corner of my eye, I saw a look forming on Beatrice's face, and for a split second I thought I had made a critical mistake. But instead, she resheathed the blade and walked toward the nearby bookcase. I pretended to stare vacantly ahead while watching Beatrice grab 2 books off the shelf at the same time, generating a click from somewhere behind the wall. She then pushed the bookcase forward to reveal a secret door and a secret room beyond. As much as I wanted to trail after her, I stayed put, calming my breathing and concentrating on staying in the moment. Beatrice returned several minutes later and handed me an envelope. "Here," she said, and I took it. It was completely flat, unlike the one she had sent me earlier with the last supply of buffs, the name of a woman, and an address somewhere in Midtown written on the front. "What's this?" "Your next task. Make sure this letter gets delivered, and I'll make sure you're taken care of by the evening." I considered the envelope and its contents. I could feel the traces of something inside, something that was more than just a letter that needed delivering. There was alchemy in there, and if I had to guess, it was a note written in the ink that I had found for her. Fine. I would jump through the hoop like a good dog and get my reward. I pocketed the letter and walked out the door. It was almost 10 a.m., and I had another 12 hours before I would literally be down to my final emergency backup buff. The NYU Fitness Center was conveniently a few blocks north of Beatrice's apartment, and a brisk jog later, I was walking to the back of the locker room showers, the sealed envelope in hand. After running the hot shower for 10 minutes, the resulting steam easily freed the glue, and I carefully removed the note. My suspicions were correct, as I recognized the same black ink from Cora's notes. Unlike those, this one was incredibly mundane, directing the recipient to transfer a random woman to the firm's West Coast office. Whatever. I didn't have enough spare brain cells to figure out what Beatrice was doing, but as long as it didn't involve me, I didn't care. An hour and a half later, the letter had been delivered, and I was back in my dorm room, waiting for the promised resupply of buffs that night. I stared at Cora's note, suspended in the solution I had crafted. Despite all my best efforts, the ink was still firmly attached to the paper, and I was firmly headed for a complete breakdown. The hours ticked down. My focus-seeking brain searched for new avenues to explore. It didn't find any, so I dove inward. I focused on my memories of the past year, of the initial excitement of discovering that vial in Brooklyn Bridge Park and the quest board soon after, the exhilaration I felt hunting for Beatrice, the danger I felt confronting Emma and her swords and stealing away her silver token, the humiliation I felt being under Cora's thumb, the anger I felt after taking back control. That first promise of adventure had turned into a living nightmare as I was throttled by this trio who thought they were better than me because they had power and I did not. But I was going to change that. Chapter 19. Cora. Cora woke up, and her apartment was on fire. The 4 posters of her bed were lit up like burning stakes, and her mind flashed back to a cold night in Salem and the villagers' vain attempt to burn her alive. They had succeeded, in part, but after the mayor's wife had fetched her necklace from the charred corpse and put it around her neck later that night, the town was quite surprised to see Cora still alive and well. They had burned her again, and then after yet another woman foolishly put on the necklace, and after yet another burning, someone finally came up with the bright idea of locking Cora away in a wooden box. 100 years later, when Cora awoke again, the witch-burning craze had fallen out of favor, and she had learned a valuable lesson in humility. But over the last century, she had grown complacent, and now she was evidently paying the price. The billowing smoke forced a reflexive cough from her host body, jolting Cora out of her daze. She threw herself through the fiery bed curtains and was aghast at the blaze that greeted her. There was heat and ash everywhere.
And crawling on the ground to the bedroom door, Cora let out a loud cry of anger as decades of work and planning were incinerated before her eyes. Her laptop sat thankfully untouched on the desk, and she grabbed it before making one last mad dash out into the hallway and down the stairs. As she walked down the street opposite the wailing sirens of the fire trucks, tears ran down her face, and she collapsed on the cobblestones of McDougal Alley. "Think," she commanded herself. "You planned for this eventuality. Set redundancies, even if you don't remember where they are right now." Of course, she had not been naive that she was invincible. It would just take time to rebuild. But she had the tools and knowledge and a malleable host, and all she needed... Wait. She pushed down into the recesses of her mind, where the poor woman was huddled into a dark corner like a malnourished street dog. "You!" Cora yelled. "What have you done?"
Nothing, said the woman, who seemed half asleep. "I did like I was told. Didn't want to end up like the other, I swear." Cora couldn't remember the last time she'd even let the woman have control back. The weariness of the months she had spent awake had finally caught up to her, and she realized that in her lust for freedom, she may have doomed herself.
"Fine," she said. "You'll be free of me soon enough."
"Wait!"
cried the woman. But Cora had already resurfaced and had now broken into a sprint. She needed someone she could rely on, someone she had trained over many months, someone who could be counted on to carry on her work while she rested. The light in the dorm room was on, despite the early morning hour, and Cora threw a flirty smile at the security guard, who buzzed her in without a second thought. On the walk up the 7 flights of stairs, she clutched her stone tightly in her right hand, a reminder of who and what she was. But not forever, she thought. Chapter 20. Kate. A sharp rapping sound stirs me out of my pensive reflection, and I open my eyes to see an envelope wedged between the ugly dorm room carpet and the cracked bottom of the door. But my hope soon turns sour as I open it up to find not a cache of the familiar green buffs, but a lone square of dark green. Its texture is as rough as sandpaper, and it looks barely edible, and when I lift it out of the envelope, I yelp in pain from its touch before dropping it on the ground. I bend down and lower my hand just above the would-be buff and focus. Pain erupts across my palm, as if a crazed griffin has mauled me with its talons, and I curl my fingers tightly around the wound. I open my eyes and slowly open my fist, fully expecting to see my blood seeping forth from the violent claw marks. But there is nothing there except the 5 lines of my life. For a moment, I consider running after Beatrice or whoever dropped off this Trojan horse. Did she think I was that stupid that I would willingly eat this poison? Perhaps. She didn't know how I'd been changed, how I could sense now the alchemy around me. And that would be her undoing. A wild thought enters my head, and before I push it back down, my hands are unscrewing the jar holding Cora's note. I carefully scoop up the buff with the empty envelope and drop it into the liquid and brace for an explosion. But instead, the green square that would have been my death slowly dissolves into solution, and I nearly shriek in delight as a few minutes later the ink is freed from the paper at last. With the purloined equipment I borrowed from the chemistry lab, I filter out the ink, careful not to spill any of the now probably deadly liquid, and am soon holding a tiny container with the power to bend anyone to my will. Another rap at the door, and I think I know who it is. I pause for a moment, trying to recall what I am supposed to remember and what I am not. On the way to greet my guest, I quickly hide the ink in my little walk-in closet, and then slowly turn the aged metal knob and pull. It's Cora. But not like I've ever seen her. She smells of ash and fire, and her magnificent red hair, which used to be blonde, is singed on the ends. "Hi," I say quietly, trying hard not to say her real name. "You look..." She pushes her way into the room and nearly knocks me over, before collapsing into my desk chair. Are you okay?" I ask, and Cora looks at me with her piercing green eyes. "I will be," she says. "Just need a minute to gather my thoughts." I lean awkwardly against my dresser,
and watch as this woman, who had made my life a living hell, seems to be on the brink of collapse. Her breathing is heavy, and I see dried streams of tears that have partially cleaned away her soot-stained cheeks. Finally, she straightens up and slowly turns her head toward me, a hungry gaze now manifest on her face.
"I want to give you something," she says.
Okay, I say mildly, but inside I'm absolutely terrified. She's clearly not in her right mind, and based on her past track record, I can't imagine that this is a generous gesture. And I realize quickly that I can't let her do whatever it is she intends to do, so I stall. "One sec," I say, and run into my closet before she can respond. My hands nimbly unscrew the fountain pen I bought the other day, and I carefully pour the little bit of ink I managed to retrieve into its nib. I set the tip of the pen onto a small scrap of paper and write the letter K. And that's when the buff runs out, and my mind turns to sludge. All I can do is stare down at the incomplete note and the pen that is mightier than any weapon I can imagine. But it's as if I'm frozen in a block of ice. My thoughts form at a wild pace, but my brain cannot focus their energy to move my fingers even an inch. Time slows to a standstill, and I wait for Cora to find me in here, a veritable statue. But then something happens. My hand begins to move. It sets the pen next to the K and writes another letter, O, and then a third, R, before the final one, A. I don't understand why this is happening until I hear someone's voice inside my head, and it isn't mine. In fact, it's the last person I want to hear right now. But her words, which she impressed into my subconscious so long ago, now compel me forward. Don't give up. I won't. Not now. Not ever. I blink, and somehow I've completed the note. I stare at the words and nod to myself before the voice in my head brings me to my feet and back outside to where Cora is absent-mindedly looking out the window. "Hey," I say, and as she turns toward me, I close the gap between us and hold out the note, like the tip of a sword. Her eyes are immediately transfixed to the words, and she repeats them in a monotone.
"Cora, give me your power."
The woman nods and stands up from the chair. My body and mind are on the verge of collapse as she approaches, and I don't know whether to try to run or hold my ground. Cora grabs my hands, interlacing our fingers. Her skin is cold to the touch, and then it isn't. It's warm, and then hot, and then burning, and then suddenly my whole body, my whole being is aflame. My eyes snap shut as Cora feeds her power into me, and it's as if I'm being hurtled down a never-ending roller coaster. But as I'm lurched downward, I feel the ill effects of the focus buffs fading away, and in their place is something else entirely. I open my eyes. Cora is kneeling in front of me with a mixture of fear and exhaustion on her face. A blinding light casts an intense green glow over everything in my little room, and it takes a few seconds to realize that it's coming from me.
Get up!
I command, and Cora lurches to her feet.
Why did you come here tonight?
She tries to fight my question, but in the end, my power is too much for her.
To give you this.
She holds up the green stone locket around her neck. Its shimmer matches my own, and for a moment I think about pulling it free and taking it, but then I stop.
Sit,
I say to her, and she awkwardly falls to the floor, her legs crossed as if she is a second grader listening to her teacher. You used me like a dog, made me jump and bark at your commands, but now it's my turn. I snap, and a ball of flame appears in my palm. Another snap, and a crackle of lightning erupts from my fingertips and shoots toward Cora. She can only yelp in pain as the electricity goes through her to the floor. I hold my hands down at my sides and push down against the air, and suddenly I'm floating half a foot above the ground. It's as if every childhood fantasy is possible. I only need to make it so.
What else can I do? Tell me!
I see Cora struggle to refuse the command, but I've put my fingers on my temple and concentrate, and she lets out a wail as if I've punched her in the stomach. Anything, she says with a whisper.
But you can't. You won't be able to.
Don't tell me what I can't do, I yell, and grasp her throat with my mind. Her hands lunge up to her neck, trying to free her next breath, and I release her after a moment. You will teach me how to use this power, and then you will serve me until you are no longer useful. I concentrate for a moment, and a silver dagger materializes in my hand from the ether. I flick it forward, guiding it with my thoughts, and it nicks a lock of Cora's hair before finding its mark in the wall behind her. Or maybe I'll kill you. I can't decide what would bring me more pleasure. I stick out my hand, and the dagger wiggles itself free from the wall, flying end over end through the air back to me. I grab it with a flourish and let out a maniacal laugh. After all the suffering I've endured, I finally feel a sense of joy at the absolute power of creation at my fingertips. But then I stumble. The dagger slips from my fingers, and before it can reach the ground, it evaporates to nothing. My vision is suddenly fuzzy, and my legs feel like they are made of jelly. The familiar feeling of the synapses in my brain slowing to a crawl. What's happening? I scream, but only a whisper escapes my mouth. I told you, says Cora, who deftly lifts me up and places me face down onto my bed. A mere mortal such as yourself has no ability to control the power that I possess. What are you? I croak out, barely able to turn my head to face her. Someone who used to be real, she says. Goodbye, Kate O'Loughlin. She grabs my hand. It is cold, like a statue. I feel my remaining power recede back into her, and before it's all gone, I desperately try to conjure up something, anything to stop her, but it's gone. And so am I. I close my eyes and think about the vial on the pier. Epilogue. The night air whipped against the ramparts of Belvedere Castle, but the man at the top didn't seem to mind. He grasped the stone railing and watched the rippling of the moon's reflection on the surface of Turtle Pond below. It had been an interesting year, but he had the oddest feeling that everything was about to shift again, which was fine. He was used to such things. It had been nice, though, to operate on his own terms, even if it was only temporary. Finally, a visitor appeared. The woman had red hair, which was odd, as the last time he saw her, she had blonde locks, but he was sure an explanation was forthcoming. "Hello, Cora," he said with a smile. "It's been a while." He waited for her to commit whatever act of violence she had planned, but reading her face, it seemed she only wanted to talk. "Is he in there still?" asked Cora, a desperate longing in her voice. "Who?" replied the man, trying hard not to laugh. "Oh, him. That's a good question. I can't recall the last time I heard his voice. Maybe it was right before I split his stone in two." "You did what?" Cora screamed, and the man who had been called Gilbert braced himself against the railing, waiting for her to charge forward. But instead, the woman slumped down to her knees. Sensing an opportunity, he walked over to her and crouched down next to her. "To be honest, I wasn't sure it would work. You homunculi are at once so powerful and yet so fragile. I ended up having to use Uconvasora, which was really ironic if you think about it." The woman head-butted him, which wasn't entirely unexpected, given what Gilbert had said. But in her current state, all she had managed was to bloody his nose. "You're lucky I always carry a handkerchief," said Gilbert, wiping all the blood away without a trace from his face and clothes, before returning the still pristine fabric to the top front pocket of his blazer. "Otherwise, I would be really mad." Cora slowly rose to her feet and began mumbling something under her breath. A green glow appeared from the locket around her neck, which slowly radiated over her entire body and then outward. Gilbert extended his hand and felt the tendrils of the homunculus's power. It filled him with a sense of longing and sadness, but he quickly brushed it away and returned to the present. "We're really doing this?" asked Gilbert. "Here? Now? This is the moment you've selected after all the centuries you've been waiting.
"Shut up," said Cora, in a language that Gilbert wasn't sure still existed. "Okay, then. Suit yourself." He withdrew a set of small silver darts from his inner jacket pocket, and with a flick of his wrist he scattered them in a staggered row between himself and Cora. The woman's energy pushed forward again, but the faint golden barrier that had formed between the darts easily dispelled it. "Ready when you are," said Gilbert, as he watched Cora manifest a ball of green energy in her right hand, a look of pure malice on her face. But then a curious thing happened. The woman's left arm, seemingly independent of her body, rose slowly from her side, and with a snap of her fingers, the alchemy dissipated. "Huh," said Gilbert, having second thoughts. "No," said Cora, but the intonation of her voice was somehow different, yet the same as moments ago. "I've let this go on far enough." Cora's hands reached up to the chain around her neck, and although her eyes seemed to scream in desperation, the rest of her face looked unconcerned with what was happening. As the chain rose over the head of the red-haired woman, Cora dissolved in an instant, and a different woman stood in her place. "Mother," said Gilbert, "there you are. I wondered where you had run off to these past several months." Gilbert squeezed the stone that was tucked inside his collared shirt, and a moment later, in his place was a teenage girl, wearing a smaller version of the business casual ensemble. "The things we do for research," said Dahlia DeWick, chairman of the guild, caressing the green stone in her hand. "I don't know how you stand to wear his stone for so long, Ty." Ty shrugged her shoulders. She was so used to traveling the city as Gilbert that she didn't give it a second thought. And after the splitting of the stone, it had been even easier to assume the homunculus's identity, with his pesky voice relegated to the other stone and her new protégé. It was too bad, really. She would have liked him to be here when she crushed his wife into a pile of dust, but her mother had spoiled that fun. "Tell me," she said, "what has little Cora been up to?" "Many things," said Dahlia, holding the stone's chain out in front of her, as if she was afraid that the woman would suddenly appear again. "But I saw to it that all of them are no longer viable. Well, almost. I have to admit I was impressed with my own resourcefulness with the limited hours I did have. The woman had built up quite a collection in that building. I took great pains to catalog everything properly before burning the place to the ground." "Good," said Ty. "I worry, though, that you fed her too much. That red hair—" "Yes, I know. It was unavoidable. I was sure she would realize immediately what was going on after she gave me the necklace that morning in bed, but she was so happy to have her freedom that I don't think she gave it a second thought." "What of her acolytes, though?" "Don't worry about them," said Dahlia. "The newer one is gone. She got the jump on poor Cora. Used up a good deal of her accumulated power in only a matter of minutes. It was actually quite spectacular. But it was too much for the girl's body to handle. The morgue will do an autopsy and chalk it up to a drug overdose, so nothing more we need be concerned about." "Are you sure about that?" Ty had observed the girl named Kate a few times over the last several months from afar, and was surprised by her resourcefulness. It was too bad that she was dead, as she would have complimented her other puppet. But things didn't always go the way you planned, even if your plans were painstakingly crafted. She was loath to let that cache of memories go to waste, though, even if her mother wasn't. That would be a good project for the next several weeks, now that her mother was back and could cover the guild's administrative responsibilities that Gilbert had been doing. "And what about the other?" "Oh, that's the best part," said Dahlia. "Beatrice will think herself so clever that she disposed of the poor girl, but we'll never know how close she came to losing everything. I say let her be for now and wait to see where she goes from here." "Fine with me," said Ty, recalling how the last direct encounter with Ms. Taylor had gone. Enforcers like Rufus didn't exactly grow on trees, and she was years away from molding another one just as talented. But she could afford to wait, now that her mother had delivered her a gift on a silver platter. "May I?" she asked, and Dahlia relinquished the green stone to her. "It may be ready for a splitting," said her mother, Though I do wonder if it is wise. Her righteous anger toward you may complicate things when she next awakens. Oh, that's where I disagree, Mother. It's exactly what I need. Because if this little jade, said Ty, stroking the edges of the stone, ever wants to see her husband again, she'll do exactly what I tell her. Suit yourself, said Dahlia, who turned toward the stairs leading down to the base of the castle. Leaving so soon? Asked Ty. Yes, my dear. I deserve a rest in my own bed after so many months away. We'll talk after the next guild meeting. Fair enough. Until then. Ty walked back to the castle railing when her mother was well and gone, and held both glamour stones in her hand. If she listened hard enough, she thought she could hear Cora's voice screaming from deep within the recesses of the alchemic shell that her mother had created so many long years ago. She smiled. What am I going to do with you now?